Chapter 1047. Boom. The whole ground shook violently. Sauron's Baelor form directly caused cracks to appear on the portal, and then the light gathered on it quickly dissipated. The whole portal had been damaged. But this was not enough. Sauron suddenly clenched the giant beheading sword with both hands and directly slashed it with a 360-degree rotation. Whirlwind slash. Super fierce attack. With a fierce slash, Sauron directly cut off the huge white bone portal in front of him. Then there was a rumbling sound and the portal in front of him quickly collapsed. Greater teleportation. Sauron, who had succeeded, did not stop at all and immediately used greater teleportation to leave. This was the base camp of the undead. If he was stopped, he might not be able to escape. When Sauron's huge body left, there was suddenly an angry roar from the fortress in the distance, and then the figure of the Ghoul King, Dor-Isen, quickly appeared in front of him. Everything around was filled with fire. Sauron's fire was fierce even in the cold climate, and there was no way to extinguish it. The pupils of the Ghoul King, Dor-Isen, shone with pale green light. He was wearing a luxurious robe and leather armor, wearing a white bone crown, and holding a spine-shaped staff called the Hunger Staff. There was a skull on the top of the staff which was a tribute to Orcus. Dor-Isen, who was endlessly hungry, had a great affinity for all creatures that were endlessly hungry. He looked like an extremely thin and dirty ghoul. His eyes flashed with a strong green ghoul light, and his feet were like the hooves of a demon. In sharp contrast to his dirty appearance, he was wearing a soft and gorgeous white robe made of human skin and a pale leather armor inlaid with many small skulls. Ghouls were the main believers of Dor-Isen, and his holy emblem was a ghoul skull. This was a powerful enemy. The Ghoul King Dor-Isen had the power of a true god. At his peak, he had reached the level of lesser divine power, and now he was probably above lesser divine power. His clergy was ghoul and necromancy, and his domains were chaos, evil, hunger, illusion, and craftiness. Because of the ghoul race, he was a god and a demon lord at the same time. However, because he was not a pure god and ghouls did not have much wisdom, Dor-Isen was not seriously affected by the avatar crisis like other gods. He was still a demon lord. Compared to a true god, he was at best a demigod. He had almost no church, and his doctrine was purely about eating to satisfy his endless hunger. Damned Baelor. The king of ghouls, Dor-Isen, did not see Sauron's appearance clearly. He only felt the residual aura of the Baelor. He roared angrily and hit the ground with his scepter and said, "You bunch of trash." He actually allowed a Baelor to destroy our master's important teleportation gate. There was no portal. No one could easily leave the abyss because the Styx was a place that even demons could easily cross, and the evil ships could not transport so many troops. The 113th floor of the abyss. Border. After confirming that the Ghoul King Dor-Isen did not pursue him, Sauron calmly returned to his territory. This was the disadvantage of demons. They were chaotic and difficult to command. If the Ghoul King pursued him, there would be internal strife among the undead and demons. There were not many high-level undead with wisdom among the undead, and there were not many demons with brains. Under the chaotic nature, a slight collision would lead to a big fight. Anyway, it was okay to fight and maybe he could even level up. Demons were like this. They were very thirsty for soul power, even if they could automatically level up after devouring the power of the undead. The rules of the bottomless abyss were extremely chaotic. The Blood Wars could give the highest level of EXP rewards, but even without the Blood Wars, demons could still advance through slaughter. It seems that the south coast has to be prepared. Although the portal of Orcus was destroyed, the undead army that had been sent to the Rift Plain was still huge. If they launched an attack, it meant that humans would have to face a terrible army of hundreds of thousands. Such a force was definitely not something a country could resist because the undead in the abyss were generally more difficult to challenge. Even the zombies were tainted by the evil aura of the abyss, and they were at least 2 or 3 creature levels. In other words, the soldiers of ordinary towns with good equipment could only fight against 1 or 2 low-level undead at most. There was almost no way to fight against those powerful beings. Motor City. The message from the abyss made Soren's heart skip a beat. The south coast was so large that even if he sent out all his forces, he would not be able to defend it. With such a huge army of undead, they could only fight if they hit one place. Otherwise, they would only be defeated quickly. It seems that I have to ask Arendelle for help. Now that Soren had a close relationship with the Frost Kingdom, Princess Royal's attitude towards him was becoming more and more friendly. This kind of big thing could not be forced. If something went wrong, it would be a total collapse. So Soren did not hesitate to ask Arendelle for help. Not only did he ask for the help of the Ice Witches, but he also hoped that Princess Royal would support him. Communication with the gods was very simple. When Soren's message had just been sent to Arendelle, Princess Royal immediately agreed. Let's do this. Princess Royal's voice was directly transmitted to Soren's mind through the temple, and slowly said, "Tomorrow there will be a group of ice witches teleported to Motor City. I will send a team of court mages to assist. If there is anything unusual, I will also come directly to Motor City." Arendelle and Motor City had a portal. Because it consumed too much power, only important people could be teleported. There were only 5 such portals, which were in Arendelle, the Northern Tower, the Wind Spear Hills, the City of Wealth, and Port Tylon. If the power of the Mies nucleus could be mobilized in the future, the number of portals should also be increased. However, it was impossible to rely solely on portals because it could not be done even during the Arcane Empire. Unless there was some kind of endless and extremely huge energy, and if there was such energy, it would be enough to make the civilization soar to the level of an interstellar civilization. Order the whole city to be on alert. Soren thought for a moment and ordered, "Put the entire south on level 1 alert. Recall all patrol fleets. Let the Legion camp near the city. Turn on the instant communication device. If there is any large-scale abnormality, immediately let the witches send a message to Motor City." The threat came from the undead. Then there was no need for the fleet at sea to be recalled to defend the city. The attack of the undead should not take too long. Chapter 1048. In a blink of an eye, it was almost December. The arrival of winter did not make Mordor City cold. So far it was just a light snow. Under the influence of the enchantment that enveloped the entire city, the climate and environment were transformed to be more suitable for people to live in. Soren had been guarding against possible attacks on the south coast. But what he never expected was that the target of Orcus' attack was not the south coast, but Mordor City far away in the outer islands. Inside the Arcane Tower. When night gradually fell, suddenly a sharp alarm sounded. "Alert! Alert! Abnormality detected. Abnormal spatial fluctuations detected 20 kilometers south of the Arcane Tower. Alert! Alert! An unknown spatial rift has appeared. Arcane Tower entering level 1 state of preparation." Thalling sharp alarms sounded. Then in the next second, Soren, Gloria, Fallen Witch, Alice and Vivian were directly teleported to the top of the Arcane Tower. There was an independent teleportation beacon here to deal with possible emergencies. What's going on? Alice seemed to have just fallen asleep. She was still wearing pajamas and her beautiful figure was faintly visible. Gloria shook her head and said, "A sudden alarm. It seems that an unknown spatial rift has been discovered." After she said that, she reached out and touched the huge crystal ball, and then a projection appeared on it. The scene in the distance appeared in front of them. A dark red spatial door opened. The whole sky seemed to be torn open and then countless demons, wraiths, liches and so on rushed out. They arrived near the 6th town in the south, Black Mountain Town. In just a while demons rushed in and then there were sharp screams and alarms. The defenders of the town only resisted for less than 3 minutes before they were broken by a powerful 6-armed snake demon. Then it was a bloody massacre. These undead and demons had no mercy at all. In the blink of an eye, hundreds of people died under their butcher's knife. Countless demons and undead passed through the portal, and in the blink of an eye, nearly 10,000 enemies were teleported to the ground. At this time, the alarm in Mordor City sounded, followed by the sound of the military camp quickly gathering. This reaction speed was already very fast, but it was still not as fast as the speed of the undead. "It's Orcus's army?" Soren's face turned pale. He never thought that Orcus would dare to attack the city of Mordor. This was like a slap to his face. Directly attacking a god's territory was the most serious form of provocation, and Orcus' actions had pushed Soren to the brink of death. Most of the people in the city of Mordor were Soren's followers, and it was also the core area of his foundation. Even if Soren won this battle, he would have to pay a huge price. Enter full combat mode immediately. Soren directly took over the highest authority of the Arcane Tower. He glanced at the others and said, "Kalina, go and activate the elemental furnace and the Mies core. Gloria, activate the floating device. Prepare the Arcane Tower to take off. Thalling, activate the lock immediately. Activate the energy protection enchantment and bring Mordor City into the range of the energy protection enchantment. Alice, you go and activate all the golems. Remember, all the golems?" Soren solemnly repeated, and then Alice nodded with a serious expression and directly teleported to the bottom of the Arcane Tower. Emergency combat mode. Emergency combat mode. The cold mechanical voice spread throughout the city of Mordor, and then it continued, Mordor City has been attacked by demons. All combatants are to be on standby immediately. Ordinary people are to return to their residences immediately. Port Mordor garrison is to enter combat mode. Everyone is to assemble in the barracks immediately. Emergency combat mode. Emergency combat mode. The 1st to 7th city guards of Mordor are to assemble outside the barracks immediately. The 3rd to 5th priest regiment are to assemble outside the temple. All wizards with a profession level of 5 and above are to enter combat mode. Please gather near the library within 5 minutes. Dragon Knights are to take off and support the garrison in the southern cities. The 3rd and 6th fleets are to sail in the direction of the inland river. Rumble. With a slight battle on the ground, the arcane tower activated the floating device, and then directly suspended about 50 meters in the air. Then a red light appeared on the neat ground, and with the sound of mechanical activation, a secret door in the basement gradually appeared, and below it was a wide staircase. Buzz. The amethyst energy storage was activated to the limit in an instant, and then in the first wide basement, the golems that were neatly arranged in dense rows opened their eyes at the same time. The 1st Golem Legion is to enter combat mode. The 2nd Golem Legion is to enter combat mode. The Golem Auxiliary Legion is to enter combat mode. The Clay Golem Auxiliary Legion is to enter combat mode. The 3rd Steel Golem Legion is to enter combat mode. Activate the Diamond Golem Squad. Energy transmission. Boom. Heavy footsteps sounded crazily. Under the full operation of the Mies's energy core, a row of 5 golems with a total of 300 quickly walked out of the basement. Followed by the 2nd Golem Legion, the Golem Auxiliary Legion, and the Clay Golem Auxiliary Legion. In just 10 minutes, about 6,000 golems had completed the assembly, and then quickly walked out of Motor City. Since the establishment of Motor City, Soren had been stockpiling the number of golems. The current reserve had reached more than 10,000 golems, and now all the golems that had been activated had been equipped with the defense ability. Witches, activate the portal. Soren's cold order sounded, activate the number 23 space waymark. Connect and lock. High Priest, prepare to teleport to the Archbishop. Activate the Diamond Golem emergency response device. Begin teleporting the number 1 Diamond Golem formation. Buzz. A door opened near the laboratory, and then 12 senior witches quickly arrived, and Saruman's figure soon appeared. A portal opened and connected to the nearest teleportation point of the demon army. As early as the 2nd transformation of Mordor City, Soren had set up teleportation beacons inside Mordor City in order to deal with possible sudden attacks. 10 activated diamond golems quickly appeared, and then stepped into the portal. Vivian Lillian, you go support the front line. Soren nodded, then pointed to the direction of the sea. In front of Port Motor, the surrounding seawater suddenly separated to the left and right, and then a dark mast broke through the waves, and then the ghost ship rushed out from the bottom of the sea. With the appearance of the magic light, the ghost ship directly floated in the air, and all the earthbound spirits automatically became busy, quickly turned the muzzle, and then flew toward the location of the demon army. Arcane Tower activated. Soren's figure turned into a golden shadow and then said, Super Magic Pulse Cannon charging. Coordinates 23:14. His god-level perception spread out. Soren instantly locked on to a group of liches and senior demons among the enemy, and said coldly, Start charging. Target locked. Super Magic Pulse Cannon ready to fire. Boom. The silver-white barrel quickly turned, and then it quickly charged at a speed that had never been seen before. Then an energy cannon directly crossed the air and hit a point 20 kilometers away in an instant. Rumble. There was a violent earthquake. Inside the demon army that suddenly appeared, about 50 meters were directly evaporated by the cannon, and glass-like crystals appeared on the ground. Except for a few liches that used accidental teleportation, the rest were completely evaporated. The 1st City Defense Force has been assembled. The 2nd City Defense Force has been assembled. The 3rd City Defense Force has been assembled. The Drow officer gave the order without any expression, and then quickly gathered the troops and rushed toward the location of the battle. The location of Port Motor. All the naval fleets were in place, and under the command of the officer, they quickly set sail and approached the inland river. At this time, Soren's figure appeared in the temple, and then he said, Gloria, you take over the command of the Arcane Tower. Divine form. Countless divine powers gathered around the great temple gathered toward Soren's body, and then a golden giant appeared over the temple. Soren took a step and appeared more than 20 kilometers away, and then he slammed his fist on the ground. Area Divine Power Shock Wave *3. A surge of divine power swept across the area within a radius of 300 meters. Soren's domain blocked all teleportation spells, and then a large number of undead fell to the ground in batches. Even the powerful liches could only withstand the third wave of Area Divine Power Shock Wave, and then their whole body turned into ashes like scattered bones. 3 Area Divine Power Shock Waves directly consumed a lot of Soren's divine power. However, it also stopped the enemy's attack in an instant. Soren's figure turned back into the form of a saint, and then he activated his divinity and directly entered the state of Avatar. The figure of the arcane tower appeared in the distance. The Quetzalcoatlus quickly rushed to the battlefield, blocking the attack of some flying demons, and at the same time covering the evacuation of the residents in the town. In just 10 minutes, 3 nearby towns had been attacked, and more than 5,000 civilians had died at the hands of the demons and the undead. The mighty army of the undead was still teleporting into the range of the island of Moder. In just a while, the core area occupied by the enemy had gathered more than 30,000 undead troops. Even Soren did not dare to go deep and use the power of divinity to close the portal here, because a powerful demon lord's breath covered this area. Orcus. One of the 3 giants of the abyss, the undead king, Orcus had come to Moder in person. Chapter 1049. Orcus. Its full name was Demon Monarch of Undead Creatures. When Soren saw the undead king, Orcus in the distance, some information about him had already emerged in his mind. This was definitely a very difficult opponent to deal with. Name: Orcus, Undead Monarch, large otherworld creature, chaotic, evil, transdimensional, HP, 900 plus special attack, command undead creatures, spell-like ability, spells, divine light of fear, poison, summon demon, undead creature summon, Orcus staff. Special feature: damage reduction 25 legendary, kindness and cold steel, night vision 60 feet, immunity to poison and lightning, cold, acid and fire resistance 10 each, otherworld creature trait, realm of God, dead talk, telepathy 100 feet. Attributes: strength 45, dexterity 22, vitality 33, intelligence 28, wisdom 28, charm 34. Skills: bluff 600, focus 590, negotiation 600, escape 240, gather information 490, intimidation 600, knowledge 570, listen 530, sneak 520, search 520, observation 500, spell identify 570, necromancy spells 590, detect 550, survival 570, in other planes 590. Specialties: blind fighting, cleave of momentum, combat casting, crafting magic wands, crafting wondrous items, strengthen spell effectiveness, powerful cleave of momentum, spell upgrade, proficient in preemptive attacks, multi-strike, violent attack, instant spell cast, legendary abilities, legendary spell casting, multi-strike, undead dominator, undead domain. Spells that can be cast at will: corpse manipulation, blasphemy, charm monster, abyssal darkness, blasphemy, detect kindness, detect magic, detect thoughts, fear, greater dispel magic, greater teleport, lightning beam, polymorph, read magic, suggestion, emblem of death, emblem of pain, clever speech, true knowledge, evil residence, evil divine light, evil shadow strike, firewall. Once a day, retarded spell. Orcus has a spellcaster level of 35. He can cast spells like a level 20 necromancer or level 15 priest. His restriction school is enchantment and illusion. His domain is death, destruction, and evil. Challenge level, 28+. As one of the 3 great lords of the abyss, Orcus had the power to challenge gods head-on. Even some of the weaker gods were no match for him, even in their true god form. This terrifying abyssal lord had 45 strength, which was the highest among all the demon lords. In other words, there were almost no creatures in the abyss that could compete with his power, and this power did not have any magic effect. The most common power he used was bull strength. He was one of the targets that the adventurers wanted to capture the most. Other than the abilities that Soren could recall, Orcus also had the abilities of a level 20 legendary necromancer, including but not limited to Meteor Blast, Banshee's Howl, Soul Bind, Wish, Energy Drain, and so on. Orcus could also cast the abilities of a priest up to the 9th circle, including Killing Spell, Lethal Spell, Chaos Mantra, and so on. His domains were death, destruction, and evil. It had special legendary spells such as Mummy's Dust, Collapse, Summon the Undead Army, and so on. In the meantime, Orcus also had Deity's Domain, which gave him omniscience, complete perception, domain knowledge, and other abilities. To put it simply, this domain was similar to Soren's ability in his true god form. This gave Orcus the power to challenge gods head-on and even kill them. But these were not the most frightening things about him. The most frightening thing about Orcus was his weapon, which was the legendary +5 artifact, Orcus Staff. This was a divine artifact that was given the power of death. It was not very powerful in terms of damage. It was just a huge black skeletal staff, but it was given an extremely frightening ability. Any living creature that came into contact with the Orcus staff would have to forcibly trigger a 40 test of death. This meant that any living creature that was weaker than this would be killed by this artifact. Under normal circumstances, only a level 20 pure-blooded warrior would have a 50% chance of being immune, and any living creature that was weaker than legendary would have a 90% chance of surviving. There was less than a 10% chance of being immune. Warning. This power would be triggered as soon as it was touched, which meant that if one was not able to resist the power of death, they would be killed instantly. Just as Soren was looking at Orcus in the distance, the Abyss Lord was also looking at Soren. Both sides felt great pressure. Soren was a mid-level god, and Orcus was the most powerful demon lord. Both sides had the ability to kill each other, but it was hard to say who would win. Attack. Orcus held a huge black skeletal staff and pointed forward. Then, behind the undead army, a few figures that were 5 or 6 meters tall appeared. Vampire giants. These giants that were turned into undead creatures by Orcus were also a huge threat in the abyss. For mortals they were legendary creatures. At the same time, some evil liches also appeared. They began to cast all kinds of spells to buff the undead knights. The undead army surged forward like a tide. The army from Moder was still on their way. 20 kilometers was not a short distance. Let's give up here. Gloria sighed and said, the Golem army is still on their way. There is no way to defend this place. We can only retreat until the army arrives. The number of enemies was too great. In just a short while there were already 50 to 60,000 undead. The 3 towns in front of him had basically been destroyed. Except for the people who were evacuated by the Quetzalcoatlus Knights at the beginning, the others were basically surrounded by the undead and demons. There were shrill screams and wails in the distance. Soren watched his believers and subjects being slaughtered, and his eyes could not help but show a blood-red light. Nearly 10,000 people were slaughtered by the undead. The power of mortals was so weak that they could not resist the attack of the Abyss Lord. Retreat. Soren gritted his teeth and said. He could not fight against so many enemies in his saint form. Besides, Orcus could join forces with the legendary undead to kill him at any time. The diamond golems formed a defensive formation. The wyvern knights covered the surroundings and killed some flying demons that tried to chase after them. The scattered battles were still going on. More than 12,000 civilians were killed by the undead. Then, the necromancer used their bones to perform an evil sacrifice and summon more undead creatures. Behind Soren, the army of Moder had begun to appear. The priests from the church continued to bless the army with divine spells such as courage, protection, strength, and so on. With the sound of heavy footsteps, the Golem Legion began to appear in batches. Nearly 11,000 golems of various kinds quickly spread out on the battlefield and formed a steel wall in front of the front line. Activate the magic lock. Gloria's voice came from the top of the arcane tower. Then a large light curtain opened, and then a huge magic power shrouded the battlefield in front of them. The magic lock was the most terrible weapon on the battlefield. Since the Silver Age, the High Elves and human great arcanists had tried to build a magic lock for hundreds of years. A complete magic lock included the following abilities: permanent spells, instant large-scale spells, forbidden spells, area anti-magic field, activation spells, permanent effects, and so on. With the activation of the power of the Mies energy core, a cold mechanical voice sounded inside the arcane tower. Activate the permanent effect of the magic lock, negative energy protection barrier. Activate the super large enchantment spell, death protection barrier. What was the most terrible ability of the undead? It was not the means to resurrect and summon the undead, but the various negative energy and instant death spells of the high undead. Gloria activated a large protective negative energy barrier, and at the same time, activated the power of the anti-death barrier. Within the range of the magic lock, most of the instant death spells would lose their effect, unless the power was enough to break through the limit of the magic lock. In this case, one would need a casting level of at least 35 or above. At present, it seemed that only Orcus could do it among all the undead and demons in front of them. Shadow Realm. The gray shadow shrouded the space and Soren's figure appeared in mid-air. All the rogues who believed in and served him became hazy for a while. Under the blessing of Soren's Shadow Realm, their sneak and hiding ability gained an additional 50 points, and their evasion ability gained a hazy bonus of 10 points. There was no limit to the number of times they used Shadow Power. The Shadow Power mobilized by abilities such as Shadow Strike, Shadow Raid, and so on was directly provided by Soren. Order, Realm. Soren's divine power resisted Orcus's Realm of Chaos and offset all the negative effects it brought. Slaughter, Realm. Death Realm. Soren activated one realm after another. The Pirate Realm strengthened the morale of the army, the Fear Realm counteracted the fear aura of the High Undead, the Magic Realm strengthened the Spellcaster's penetration, and the Slaughter and Death Realm suppressed the undead army in the distance. Gloria and Fallen which appeared at the top of the Arcane Tower. Vivian and Lillian stood on the deck of the Dead Man's Voice. Alice appeared behind the Diamond Golem. Saruman's body was surrounded by twisted vines. The High Priest stood silently behind Soren, and on the side was the bishops led by the Divine Priest Milan. The giant's burly figure was covered in plate armor, and behind him was a team of heavily armored warriors. The Golem army opened a 3-kilometer-long defense line. In front of them, countless undead appeared from the portal in the distance. The demon army gathered on the left, and the undead army formed a battle formation on the right. The huge army of more than 200,000 almost filled the space in front of them. Orcus's figure was so conspicuous among the countless undead. As he clenched his scepter and pointed forward, the fully assembled enemies began to attack. Countless undead and demons rushed forward like a raging tide. This was the real Abyss army. Even in the Blood War, such an Abyss army was enough to fight against the elite demons. Chapter 1050. Although Soren had a huge force. But within the city of Mordor, there were not many troops that could be mobilized. Because even if the population of the entire island of Mordor was added together, it was only about 400,000 or 500,000 people. The proportion of the army in Mordor was about 1/10. There were about 30,000 regular troops in the inner city, 5,000 defenders in the port area, and the rest were fleets. At most, they would occasionally rest on the island of Mordor, and then there were a large number of militia troops in many towns. This number was relatively large, estimated to reach the scale of 60 to 70,000. However, the combat power of the militia was too low. At most, a militia could deal with 1 or 2 skeletons. When facing the real Abyss army, they could basically ignore them. If they went to the battlefield, they would be killed. In this way, Soren could actually gather very few troops in a short time. The city defense army could come one after another, about 20,000 people. There were about 2,000 or 3,000 people from the church, witches, and professions. The core force was still the Arcane Tower and the Golem army. Soren could not give up the outer towns to defend Mordor because there were at least 100,000 people in the outer 12 towns. If he gave them up and let them be slaughtered by the undead army, not only would Soren's strength be greatly reduced, but his prestige and faith would also be shaken in an instant. Therefore, in this case, Soren could only fight head-on. And he had to fight. When Orcus's undead army gathered and launched an attack, all the troops that Soren could mobilize in a short time were also concentrated in the plains. There were about 36,000 troops in Mordor. The number of Orcus's army was between 200,000 and 300,000. Nearly 10 times the number of troops gave great pressure, but the soldiers of Mordor did not retreat in the slightest, and even their morale was not shaken at all, because the true God was with them. The top combat power of Mordor was gathered together. There was also an arcane tower in the sky. The domain of the magic lock had also been activated. The mighty golems formed a line of defense. These powerful golems were not at a disadvantage even in the face of demons. Especially the large-scale steel golems, their combat power was enough to defeat all the blood army. Woo woo woo. The dull sound of a bugle horn was heard. Countless dretches were driven forward. Orcus was still using the same tactic as the Abyss, which was to use a large number of cannon fodders to consume the enemy's strength. Among the nearly 300,000 Abyssal army, there were about 50,000 low-level demons, followed by about 100,000 low-level undead. These were all cannon fodder that could be used at will. Even with numbers, they could still defeat a large number of enemies. More than once, the elite army of devils had been surrounded by 10 times the number of low-grade demons and died of exhaustion. Shield formation. The dull roar of the drow officer sounded, and then from the defense line of the city of Mordor, a team of warriors with full armor and giant metal shields walked out. There were also many Durgars among them. Despite their short stature, they were holding giant shields that were even larger and heavier than themselves. It was as if they didn't care at all. These Durgars were specially trained shield warriors. They were equipped with full-body armor, enchanted shields and one-handed war hammers. They were the strongest defensive force of the army, and they were responsible for resisting the frontline attacks. Boom, boom. The muffled sound of cannon fire was heard. The portal at the rear urgently mobilized a batch of cannons, and there was also long-range artillery support from the warships in the direction of the inland river. However, these were not the key factors that determined the outcome of the battle. Under Gloria's command, the witches worked together to cast their spells. Dense fireballs fell from the sky and bloomed on the map within a radius of 100 meters. Every time they cast a spell, they would take away thousands of demon cannon fodder. Nearly 100,000 cannon fodders gradually approached and quickly fell to the ground in the process. In just 5 or 6 rounds of attacks, 30 to 50,000 low-level demons and low-level undead had been destroyed. Orcus, who was in the rear, could not help but frown. The organizational ability and probability of the army of Mordor were completely beyond his imagination. It made him feel like he was fighting against the army of devils. Because in the bloody battle, the elite devils also ignored such a huge number and efficiently eliminated batch after batch of demon cannon fodders. The trial of Sauron's battle flag plane began to take effect. The main target of the trial was the demons, and most of the officers in Mordor had entered it, so when they really faced the demon army they did not panic at all. If the officers did not panic, the soldiers below would not panic. All orders were carried out in an orderly manner, and the enemy was quickly reduced under the attack. Clay golems enter combat state. The clay golems, which occupied the largest proportion of the city of Mordor, began to step forward. Nearly 6,000 clay golems and stone golems formed the first line of defense. When the 70 or 80,000 undead cannon fodders approached, the clay golems did not change at all. With 25 points of strength, they directly crushed the enemy. At the moment of contact, 7 or 8,000 skeletons and dretches were smashed without hesitation. The ability, resist attack, was originally for defensive counterattack, and the effect was amazing against cannon fodders. And the most important point was that although the clay golem's combat power was close to the lowest among the golems, they had a very powerful ability. They had about 10 points of damage immunity, and they were very effective against sharp weapons. They could gradually recover their damage during the battle. Mordor did not make large and giant clay golems, which made them unable to fight against high-grade beings, but it was enough to crush these cannon fodders with numbers. Batches of demon cannon fodders fell down. The dretches were the first to be unable to bear it and began to collapse quickly. Even the demon generals could not stop them. There were 30 to 50,000 demon corpses at the front of the battle, but only 100 or 200 clay golems were destroyed. The skeletons and zombies were basically of little use, especially when facing the golems. They were difficult to break through. Earthquake. The ground began to shake violently. A small group of necromancers quietly approached under the leadership of the Lich, and then launched a large-scale earthquake. Then many clay golems began to crack. This spell caused high damage to the clay golems. However, they only had so many opportunities. At the moment when they were close to the battlefield and finished casting, these people were completely exposed. The Dark Blade assassins blessed by Sauron quickly dealt with them. The battlefield entered a war of attrition. The army of Mordor was on standby in the rear. The clay golems began to fight with the cannon fodders in front of them. Almost every time a clay golem was destroyed, the undead would have to pay 100 times the price. The basic cost of a clay golem was more than 3,600 gold coins. If it was sold on the market, the price would be about 15,000 gold coins. Requires casting a spell to activate. Sauron did not feel distressed at the moment. He watched the clay golems and the abyss cannon fodders in front of him without blinking. The main force basically stopped attacking. In this way, Sauron used nearly 1,800 clay golems to fight against nearly 100,000 undead cannon fodders. In his heart, he was already prepared to use Kindler to fight against the demons. Chapter 1051. Piles of bones and corpses piled up like mountains. The high-grade demons obviously did not expect the army of Mordor to be so resilient, and the successful cannon fodder could not break into the enemy's defense line. The war of attrition failed. This was a blow to the demons' morale because in every battle, they succeeded in using cannon fodder to kill part of the enemy's main force. But now the enemy in front of them had only consumed a part of the golems, and there were still many golems in the rear. If they wanted to completely defeat the enemy, they did not know how many people would die. Hezru attack. Skeletons attack. Aukus did not care about the consumption of more than 100,000 cannon fodder. He clenched his scepter and looked at Soren, who was also motionless, and waved his hand to start the second round of attrition. In the bottomless abyss, even the middle-grade demons were also cannon fodder. They were just higher-grade cannon fodder. Aukus had plenty of cannon fodder, and he did not believe that the enemy in front of him could resist all the cannon fodder attacks. Ghouls, skeleton warriors and some undead knights joined the battlefield. On the other side were berserk demons and Hezru demons as the core cannon fodder of the bloody war. These creatures with amazing strength and huge size were enough to crush the enemy. Their tenacious vitality could break through any defense line. The Hezru demons roared again and again. In Soren's line of defense, many officers began to issue orders. After experiencing the battle flag trial, they knew very well that the Golem Legion alone could not stop all the Hezru. Steel golems enter combat mode. More heavy footsteps sounded, and steel golems appeared in front of the defense line. There were not many of them. Even in Mordor there were only about 1,600 of them, but their combat power was quite strong. Any steel golem alone was at the level of a mini-boss. Steel golems and golems mixed to form a defense line. At this moment, the Grey Dwarf Shield Warriors also joined the battle. They were scattered on both sides to cover. Some heavy armored warriors with swords in both hands spread out. Assassins and rogues escaped into the shadows, ready to destroy the demons that broke through the defense line. The Berserk demons and Hezru demons' charge was unstoppable. These terrible demons faced the Golem army of Motor City head-on, and they were not at a disadvantage at all. They crushed the clay golems at the front and were held back by the golems. A small number of them broke through the defense of the steel golems, but they soon encountered the stone-like shield warriors of the Grey Dwarves. Saruman, you may make your move now. The high priest's voice rang out. Then they saw Saruman scatter a field of sparkling and translucent crystals. These crystals scattered with the wind, and the plants on the ground grew wildly the moment they came into contact with them. Countless vines rose from the ground. A large-scale entanglement spell that enveloped the battlefield appeared. At the same time, the vines also had some terrifying characteristics. They could devour flesh and blood to strengthen themselves, quickly stopping the advance of the demon army. Demigod Saruman. The power of the legendary realm had finally made its move. This made one of the Balers restless, but when it saw Soren at the back, it obediently gave up on the idea. Only Orcus could fight against Soren. Everyone else would die if they encountered Soren. The Lich at the back did not move, and the demons did not dare to act rashly. The fierce battle was still going on. One by one, the golems fell to the ground under the attack of the demons, and some soldiers of Motor City began to fall. When the snake demons began to join the battlefield, the giant looked at the high priest in the distance. After getting her signal, he roared, and some heavily armored soldiers joined the battle under the lead of the giant. The anchor that weighed more than half a ton was swung by the giant. Even the Hezru demons would be half dead if they were hit by it. This new force quickly defeated the demons in front of them, and at the same time, stopped the snake demons outside the line of defense. The priests began to cast their divine spells. Because of the existence of Soren's domain, the number of divine spells they had was obviously more. Some healing spells kept appearing, and the number of casualties of the enemy was obviously much higher than that of Motor City. Balers, assassins, Glabrizu, six-armed snake demons. Some huge black shadows appeared in the sky. The Balers roared excitedly, opened their huge demon wings and launched an attack. However, at this moment, a high-pitched dragon roar sounded. An adult shadow dragon led the Quetzalcoatlus to fly towards these demons. Dragons were the overlords of the sky. Even the high-grade demons did not dare to fight with them in the air. The difference in size between the two sides was too big. Some reinforcements from the shadow plane had arrived. Soren also had some troops in the shadow plane, including an adult shadow dragon. Go! Vivian clapped her hands, and then a huge Quetzalcoatlus appeared. It was given divinity by Vivian, and it looked as big as an old dragon. There were screams in the sky, and demons fell one after another. Witches, get ready to fight. When the necromancers started casting their spells, the witches under Gloria's command also prepared for battle. The enemy's attack was getting fiercer and fiercer. Soren narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at Orcus behind him. He was waiting for the other side to make a move. It seemed that no one could stop Soren, and Soren also did not have many people who could fight against Orcus. Even Vivian and Lillian were in a bit of danger. Orcus did not move and Soren could not act rashly. Diamond Golems attack. The core fighting force of Motor finally moved. Under the command of Gloria, more than 100 Diamond Golems appeared on the battlefield. Their huge size gave the demons a lot of pressure. These Diamond Golems were the strongest army that Soren had accumulated. There were countless diamonds that were smashed on them, and each Diamond Golem had legendary fighting strength. They pushed into the demon army, and only the high-grade demons could stop them. Orcus finally could not help it. The skeleton knights began to attack, the lichess figures were erratic, the vampire giants quickly charged, and the ancient mummies appeared one after another. The most powerful undead began to move. On the side of Motor, Gloria, Fallen Witch, Vivian, Alice, and others also began to move, casting spells on themselves. Only they could stop these terrible creatures. Orcus finally moved. He gripped the huge black skeletal staff tightly and stepped forward. Soren stared at him and his figure disappeared in an instant. There was a strange vacuum in the middle of the battlefield. Neither the army of Motor nor the army of the Abyss dared to get close because this was a battle between gods. Whether it was Soren or Orcus, they both had terrible power that could crush legendary legends. The cold wind whistled. The surrounding coldness seemed to be getting more and more obvious, and little crystal snowflakes fell from the sky. Chapter 1052. Orcus' figure looked huge and bloated. However, when Soren's figure suddenly appeared and slashed at Orcus with his curved sword, Orcus dodged with great agility. At the same time he swung the Orcus staff backhandedly and smashed it at Soren. Blind fight. Holy realm. Orcus, who was 6 or 7 meters tall and weighed more than 6,000 pounds, was agile beyond his size and managed to dodge Soren's sneak attack. God's descent. Golden light gathered around Soren's body. Facing Orcus, who had 45 points of strength, Soren did not have the confidence to face him head-on. Thus, he directly entered God's descent and increased his temporary stats to the maximum. Clang. It was the first direct confrontation. Soren blocked Orcus' attack with his dual swords, but his figure was pushed back more than 10 meters. The difference in strength is too great. Soren swallowed the blood in his mouth and tested the effect of Orcus' staff on him. He then stood still and stretched his body. Suddenly his figure split into two. Mimicry. Soren did not use the doppelganger ability because the death of the doppelganger would damage the original body. However, mimicry did not have this problem and could also interfere with the enemy's battle. In a confrontation of this level, normal spells were basically useless. Both Soren and Orcus had more than 1,000 HP. Their immunity to normal spells was too high, and most of the elemental damage was also limited. In this situation, the only thing that both sides could compete with was the most basic of skills. For example, Soren would not give Orcus a chance to cast spells, and Orcus was not afraid of most of Soren's spells. All along, Soren's endurance was extremely high, and he also had the divine domain of death. Orcus' staff could not trigger the death effect at all. This was Soren's biggest advantage. Clang clang clang. In this short confrontation, both sides had a better understanding of each other's strength. Soren was a classic example of high agility and high attack, while Orcus was a classic example of high strength and high damage. Both sides were at the extremes and neither had any obvious weaknesses. Boom boom boom. The first round of physical confrontation ended. In an instant, Orcus cast more than 10 spells. These were all instant cast spells. He was still trying to find out Soren's weakness. Shadow Leap. Was a pity. Soren wasn't afraid of spells. He was immune to spells from Circle 1 to Circle 4, and he had Divine Shield to protect himself from higher-level spells. He could also hide in the shadows. Similarly, Soren also gave his opponent the first round of instant cast spells. He used Melf's Strong Acid Arrow and Melf's Minute Meteor. Orcus howled in pain. It seemed like he was not immune to Soren's spells and had suffered some damage. However, his regenerative ability was very strong, and he also had the ability of a priest. He recovered in the blink of an eye. The battle seemed to have reached a stalemate. Both Soren and Orcus had the ability to hurt each other, but they weren't confident that they could kill each other in one hit. Soren could heal himself with divine spells. Similarly, Orcus could be restored using divine arts. The battle between the two sides determined that they had to suppress the other side, and it was obvious that this was not going to be easy. Outside the battlefield, the advantages of the city of Mordor began to show. Vivian and Lillian were mid-level gods together. Saruman was a demigod, Fallen, which was a high-grade legendary spellcaster. Alice controlled a huge golem army, and Gloria controlled the magic lock on the arcane tower. From time to time she could also use the superconducting mana crystal pulse. If it wasn't for maintaining the energy of the magic lock, a round of cannon fire would be enough. The battle was tilting towards the city of Mordor. Orcus had great power, but he didn't have any gods as his subordinates. The only one that could be regarded as a god was the Ghoul King Dorison, but now it seemed that he wasn't on the battlefield. In the battle, Orcus was obviously getting anxious. He tried to find Sorin's weakness, and his attacks were getting fiercer and fiercer. On the other hand, Sorin was gradually moving around and could even use simulacrum to hunt down nearby liches. Sorin couldn't kill Orcus at once, but he could delay the opponent and gradually suppress the situation of the Abyss army. Undead Domain. Lord of the Undead. Mummy's Dust. Orcus finally couldn't help it. With the opening of a domain, he raised his hand and sprinkled out a gray dust. Then the figures of 6 ancient mummies began to gather in front of him, and at the same time, they rushed towards Sorin from all directions. There's actually such a method. In one breath, he summoned 6 legendary helpers, which surprised Sorin. But soon the light of the elemental stone appeared, and an elder wind elemental, an elder fire elemental, and a giant earth elemental poured out of the portal. He also knew a lot of summoning spells such as dryads, and more dryads. However, there was no need for dryads in this level of battle. They had many other uses. Bang! In just one confrontation, the giant earth elemental summoned by Sorin was blown away, and then the elder fire elemental was torn apart by the 3 mummies. At this time, Sorin realized that something was wrong, because the ancient mummies in front of him had the light of divinity on them. He was very surprised and said to himself, they actually summoned divine mummies. Looks like there's no other way. Sorin put away his curved sword and suddenly stretched out his hand toward the void, and then said in a deep voice, "My servants, listen to my call." Gate of the Kingdom of God. A light gate opened in front of him. Since the opponent wanted to use summoned creatures to suppress him, he didn't mind showing the opponent a luxurious lineup of summoned servants. The gate of the Kingdom of God opened. Accompanied by a golden radiance, an otherworldly god's emissary walked out. Then 4 otherworldly god servants with black wings flew out, followed by 12 high-level heroic spirits in the form of shadow angels. A group of servants in the form of shadow angels protected Sorin in the middle. My lord. After the ugly monkey died, the angel from another world knelt on one knee toward Sorin, then stood up and pulled out a sharp blade that glowed with dark light. Theoretically speaking, Sorin's Gate of the Kingdom of God could summon any servant in the Kingdom of God, from gods to angels. As long as Sorin had enough divine power, he could summon as many servants as he wanted. This was the key reason why gods were almost impossible to defeat outside of the Avatar crisis. Fighting against a true god was equivalent to fighting against the Kingdom of God. The revenge of the Queen of Spiders on the Arcanists had proved this point. Kill them. Sorin nodded calmly. A true god could summon thousands of heroic spirits with a wave of his hand. He didn't have this ability now, but it was enough to summon an army of heroic spirits. Chapter 1053. The cold wind howled. After winter, the temperature in the outer islands also gradually dropped, but today the drop seemed to be very obvious. Gloria's silhouette stood at the top of the arcane tower. She was controlling the massive magic lock. However, as the snowflakes drifted away, Gloria seemed to have sensed something. She nodded lightly towards the distance. The battle below was still going on. Although the city of Mordor seemed to have a great advantage, there were too many enemies. Countless undead almost filled the field of vision. The defense line of the dwarven shield warriors was constantly being compressed, and the ratio of casualties was gradually increasing. Even if a large number of cannon fodder were consumed with golems, the number of undead army was still more than 5 times that of the city of Mordor. The middle-grade demons began to break through the defense line, and the drows pulled out their swords to join the battle. In the city of Mordor, only these drows with high-grade professions could deal with these demons one-on-one. The pressure on the priests became greater and greater. Some priests who had used up their divine spells began to join the battle with scepters. The priests in this world were not weak spellcasters. They could wear heavy armor and fight head-on with warhammers. On the other side of the battlefield, Orcus's situation seemed to be a little unfavorable. After his 3rd resurrection, he had not recovered his full strength. Neither the Lord of the Dead nor the God of Death, Nero, would allow him to fully recover. That would not allow them to control Orcus. Sorin's suppression began to become obvious. Also, because of the existence of the magic lock, the combat power of the enemy spellcasters had decreased a lot. Many low-grade spells of the liches had lost their effect, and the preparation time for high-level spells was constant. The Dark Blade and the Inquisitor Assassin, who were given divinity by Soren, had been staring at them. The figure of the arcane assassin was like a ghost. Every time he appeared, an enemy would fall. The snow was getting heavier and heavier. Orcus's figure was already covered with scars. Soren was also injured, but he immediately recovered with a high recovery spell. Dorison. Finally, the undead king, Orcus, lost all his patience. The more this battle continued, the more likely he was to lose because some of the demons had begun to collapse. They were afraid of the gods. And Mordor City seemed to have more than one god. Orcus smashed his huge scepter on the ground, and a huge summoning circle automatically formed. The figure of Dorison, the king of ghouls, appeared along with some huge twisted ghouls. He summoned his servant, the leader of the undead army, the king of ghouls, Dorison. You finally can't hold it in anymore? When the king of ghouls appeared, Soren quickly retreated. He didn't want to fight two powerful demon lords at once. Snowflakes danced in the air. Soren's figure turned into a golden shadow as he slowly said, "Then let's end this now." Whoosh! A gale swept through the entire battlefield in an instant. The snowstorm suddenly became incomparably fierce, and the ground froze into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. Countless ice and snow fell like sharp blades, and the demons let out incomparably shrill screams, and the undead army fell to the ground in droves. Princess Royal's figure appeared. After Soren bought a lot of time for her, Princess Royal finally completed this super-large divine spell. Icebound Kingdom. The cold instantly shrouded the battlefield. The army of Mordor City quickly retreated, and a terrible snowstorm fell from the sky. The low-level undead were directly frozen into ice sculptures, and the high-level demons were covered with scars. Ice and snow gathered in the wind. Then a little golden light fell, and a 20-meter-tall snow giant appeared in the snow and ice. It roared and rampaged through the undead army. All attacks could hardly leave a mark on its body because the ice and snow quickly repaired it. Sure enough. Soren looked at the countless fallen undead and murmured, "The large-scale lethality of spellcasters after ascending to godhood is still greater than that of melee fighters." Princess Royal almost reversed the situation of the battle by herself. This kind of scene could only be achieved by Gloria using meteorite, but that meant that the island of Mordor would be severely damaged. Soren was still not comparable to Princess Royal in terms of AoE damage. He could use area divine power shockwaves and legendary spells, but there was no way to kill tens of thousands of demons and undead as quietly as Princess Royal. Master. In the snowstorm, a girl with a nine-tailed whip appeared. She stopped a group of high-level demons and some petitioners appeared behind her. The Girl of Pain bowed slightly to Soren to show her respect, and then quickly joined the battle. Soren just frowned slightly at this. As Soren's subordinate god, under normal circumstances, the Girl of Pain should have joined the battle as soon as possible. But in fact, the situation was that when Princess Royal appeared, and the battle was almost completely in Mordor's favor, the Girl of Pain summoned her heroic spirit. Sure enough, Soren said to himself, the native god who surrendered is not trustworthy. Soren was a little disappointed with the Girl of Pain. The undead's attack stopped. The army of Mordor City launched a counterattack, and Soren, Princess Royal, and Vivian surrounded Orcus's Dorison. The situation was very clear. Orcus, the undead king, and Dorison, the ghoul king, would face Soren, intermediate divine power, the twins of fear, Vivian and Lillian, intermediate divine power, and Arendelle's snow goddess, Princess Royal, intermediate divine power. A trace of fear finally appeared on Orcus's face. On the other hand, Dorison, the ghoul king, was very confused. He thought that his master was going to attack the material plane to plunder and kill, but he didn't expect that his master was going to attack Mordor City. Dorison, who had just responded to the summon, didn't see the situation clearly, and then he found himself surrounded by three intermediate divine powers. His mood was simply F***cat up. Roar. Orcus let out a roar full of unwillingness. He waved the Orcus staff and rushed towards Soren. However, what everyone didn't expect was that when Orcus rushed up crazily, Dorison, the ghoul king, quietly retreated, then suddenly opened a strange door of light and disappeared directly in front of everyone's eyes. He escaped. The surrounding space had been sealed, but he still escaped. Crafty field? Soren seemed to have thought of something, and then he faced Orcus in front of him. Orcus had no chance of winning. When Dorison, the ghoul king, escaped, the less than 30% chance of winning was directly reduced to zero. Unless some kind of miracle happened, It was impossible for Orcus to defeat 3 intermediate divine powers at the same time. He was dead for sure. He just didn't know if he could be resurrected after this death. Maybe. Dying in the hands of Soren would be his final end. Chapter 1054. The battle was still going on. However, when the king of ghouls ran away, the only thing left was to kill the Abyss army. Orcus was very powerful, but even the most powerful two-headed baboon, Demogorgon, couldn't fight against 3 mid-level gods at the same time. Therefore, Orcus' injuries became more and more serious. Princess Royal's frost domain greatly reduced Orcus' speed and reflexes, and Vivian and Lillian's harassment constantly attacked his recovery ability. Soren, as the main damage output of the battle, was wandering around. Under the siege of 2 god-tier spellcasters and a god-tier thief, even if Orcus was once one of the 3 giants of the Abyss, he could only hold on for about 10 minutes before his heart was pierced by Soren's silver light. Roar! A roar full of unwillingness sounded. Orcus' remaining vitality dissipated with Soren's last blow, and then a lot of divine light scattered on the battlefield. However, in the haze, an invisible shadow emerged, and then it broke away from Orcus' body and immediately wanted to drill into the ground. It was automatically returning to the bottomless abyss. A little bit of divine light scattered on the battlefield, and the one who gained the most was naturally Soren, followed by Vivian and Lillian, and then the fallen witch who didn't participate in the battle came in third. On the contrary, Princess Royal, who was the main force of the battle, only absorbed a little divine value, and then Gloria also only got a little. The golden light spots were divided into more than 20 parts and scattered on the battlefield. Some merged into the bodies of the high-grade demons that escaped, and some fell into the bodies of the professions in the city of Motor. The giants who had half of the swamp giant bloodline gained a little divine value. Where do you think you're going? Soren saw the shadow that escaped, but strangely Vivian and Princess Royal didn't notice it. It seemed that only those who mastered the power of death could see Orcus' soul, and when Soren opened his death domain to trap the soul in front of him, he immediately felt a strong struggle. This was a very unique soul. He was protected by the chaotic energy of the bottomless abyss. Orcus' physical body was just a shell. The soul in front of him was everything. As long as this soul was not destroyed, Orcus could still be summoned back to life. Bang! The Orcus staff fell to the ground. As Soren trapped the soul in front of him, he was surprised that Orcus' soul had the power to resist the power of the death priesthood. Looks like the legend says that Orcus is the first undead in this world. Maybe it's true. It was a very strange point. Soren was unable to suppress this soul. Faced with Soren's approach, Orcus' soul gritted its teeth and broke through Soren's defense. Then it escaped into the Orcus staff. The radiance of divinity shone. Then a faint light appeared on the Orcus staff, and Orcus' soul completely hid inside the divine artifact. Do you think I can't do anything to you just because you're hiding in a divine artifact? Soren waved his hand and the Orcus staff fell into his hand. This +5 divine artifact was very famous. However, Orcus' resurrection seemed to have something to do with this divine artifact. This was the 3rd time Orcus had been resurrected. It was impossible for him to come back to life every time. Soren believed that the reason for Orcus' continuous resurrection must be because of this divine artifact. I can't suppress it? Soren tried to use his divine power to invade the divine artifact, but it was like mud sinking into the sea. He frowned and looked at the Orcus staff in front of him. He muttered, "This thing is actually so heavy? Something's wrong. Could it be a divine artifact made from annihilation? There's no point in hiding in there. I have ways to deal with you slowly." The weight of the Orcus staff was terrifying. According to Soren's estimation, the staff's actual weight should be more than a ton. However, it was enchanted with spells. It seemed that anyone who was given the right to use it could also use it. However, its actual weight was more than a ton. It was estimated that only Orcus, who was the strongest in the abyss, could use it easily. It was no wonder that Soren vomited blood when he first fought with him. A row of data appeared in front of him. You've killed Abyss Giant, Undead King, Orcus. Extracting target's soul energy. Target's soul energy has dissipated. Extracting part of the soul. You've received 325,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 85 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've received 10 divinity. Extracting death domain. Compatibility 100%. Your death domain has been upgraded. Extracting evil domain. Compatibility 72%. Your evil domain has been upgraded. Your Death's Hand ability has been upgraded. A large amount of golden divine radiance merged into Soren's body. However, it was a little regrettable that although Soren had received nearly 100 divinity, the number of divinity he received was still very little. This was a common problem in the abyss. There were many creatures with divinity but very few with divinity. This was the same even for the 3 giants of the abyss. Although Orcus was extremely powerful, he still had a lot of divinity. The number of divinity he had was pitifully small. Moreover, every time Orcus was resurrected, he would kill and devour other powerful demons and undead to recover his strength. However, it was destined that he would not be able to accumulate much divinity. In fact, Soren had obtained enough divinity because this time it was Nero, the god of death, who secretly controlled the resurrection of Orcus. That was why there were so many divinity points. Otherwise, Soren's divinity might only be in the single digits. Looking at the entire abyss, among all the demon lords who could provide a little bit of divinity, perhaps only the succubus queen who controlled the taboo, lust, ethics and other divinity could provide a little bit more divinity. Then, the ghoul king who just escaped should have a divinity that was close to a lesser divine power. Lastly, the Knoll king should have a divinity that was close to a lesser divine power. In the abyss, it was easy to find a high-level demon with divinity, but it was difficult to find one with divinity. After all, divinity was mostly innate while divinity was mostly condensed. This determined that the difficulty of obtaining divinity was much higher than divinity. The Staff of Orcus. The soul of the abyss giant once escaped into this divine artifact. Soren tried to suppress it, but there was no reaction at all. This divine artifact seemed to be a little special because it had the power of death, and it seemed to have gathered a trace of the divinity of death in it. Unbelievable. This divine artifact seemed to be even more awesome than Orcus himself. Chapter 1055. The strong smell of blood filled the battlefield. In this battle, although the Abyss army was completely wiped out and suffered heavy losses, the disaster that Mordor City suffered was also not small. 3 towns were razed to the ground by the crazy demons, and more than 30,000 civilians were directly killed or injured in the hands of the demons and the undead. In contrast, the loss of the army was a little less because the Golem army took a considerable part of the loss. All the soldiers could not help but cheer when they defeated the powerful demon army, but soon the cheers gradually subsided because Mordor City had never suffered such a big loss, especially when so many innocent civilians died in the hands of the enemy. With the Abyss army as the center, less than 600 people in the 3 nearby towns managed to escape, and the rest were all ruthlessly killed by the undead. The casualties diluted the joy of victory, and Soren's heart was full of anger. Mordor City had never suffered such a big loss. More than 30,000 civilians were killed by the demon army. Whether it was the strength of Mordor City or Soren's church, both suffered a big blow. No matter who is behind this, he must pay the price. Soren looked into the distance. The priests still began to dispel the plague and disease. The undead brought the smell of plague and the corrosive smell of the corpse. These lands must be purified, and a large number of civilians who died in vain needed to be buried. More than 5,000 soldiers died in the battle and almost everyone was injured. If there was no support from the church behind them, perhaps more than 60% of the army of Mordor City would have died. Orcus, who ordered you to attack Mordor City? A trace of killing intent appeared in Soren's eyes. The Abyss army would not attack Mordor City for no reason. There were so many places in the material plane that could be attacked. Why would they choose Mordor City, which was the most difficult to attack? There must be someone behind this who wanted to weaken Soren's strength. Clean up the battlefield. Soren nodded to the high priest behind him, and then the next moment he appeared in the temple. The power in the temple had been consumed a lot, and a large prayer ceremony was needed to restore it. Soren held the legendary Orcus staff in his hand and waved it a little, but he felt that it was not smooth. The weight of this staff was a little too high. Even Soren felt a little uncomfortable using it. It would be much easier for the demon incarnation to use it. About 1.5 tons. Soren estimated the weight of the Orcus staff in his hand. He then examined it with his consciousness and muttered, "There's a special spell inside. If someone with Orcus permission uses it, the weight will be reduced to around 100 pounds. The heavier the weapon, the better." Needless to say, the daggers used by assassins were light and small. Thin swords were generally controlled to be less than 3 caddies in weight. Long swords would be slightly heavier, but rarely would they exceed 10 caddies. The giants, who could easily use weapons that weighed more than half a ton, were an exception. Under normal circumstances, only the demons of the bottomless abyss would use such weapons. According to a relatively simple calculation formula, a human with around 10 points of strength could bear a weight of 100 pounds under heavy load, which equated to 359 kilograms. That was close to 100 kilograms. Many people who had tried to resist Rice should have a clear idea of this. Among the extraordinary creatures whose strength was above 30, the easiest target was the young red dragon. Its large size gave it about 32 strength, and it could bear 9,600 pounds under heavy load, which was 354 tons in common units. Under normal circumstances, the amount of strength one could display had a lot to do with the weight they were carrying. Usually they could lift up to twice their maximum weight off the ground. They could also push or drag up to 5 times their maximum weight. Under better conditions, the weight could even be doubled. For example, an adult red dragon could lift up to 7 tons easy, maximum 17, 4 tons, very hard, and push or drag up to 75 tons easy, maximum 5 tons, very hard. Strictly speaking, Soren still couldn't use the Orcus staff in battle. He could easily lift it up and swing it around, but it was completely different in battle. There was a price to pay for using a heavy weapon. Even if Soren's demon incarnation had close to 40 strength, the giant executioner's sword only weighed about half a ton. Under normal circumstances, the Baylor weighed 4,500 pounds, had 35 strength, and was about 5 meters tall. However, the giant executioner's sword only weighed about 400 pounds. The Baylor could easily lift up to 10 tons of weight, but it didn't mean that they couldn't use heavy weapons. However, doing so would reduce their combat strength. Maybe I can try to make it into an executioner's sword. Soren held the Orcus staff in his hand, and he already had some ideas in his mind. Orcus's strength was the strongest in the entire abyss. Soren wasn't too sure about its limits, but even if Soren activated his divine blessing, he still felt a lot of pressure when facing Orcus. He didn't dare to fight this monster directly. The strength of his demon incarnation was 40 strength, and Soren hadn't tested it before. But according to his own estimation as the Baylor's demon incarnation, it shouldn't be too difficult to use this weapon. At least it wouldn't reduce his combat strength. This is a divine artifact. Soren stared at the Orcus staff in his hand and murmured, "How do I remake it?" A +5 divine artifact. This wasn't an easy task. Everyone knew that destroying a divine artifact would result in a severe backlash, and even Mage's Disjunction only had a 1% chance of destroying a divine artifact. Soren felt that the Orcus staff was different when he first came into contact with it. It was like a phylactery, and Orcus's soul relied on it to continuously resurrect. This undoubtedly made it more difficult to destroy it. Soren didn't just need to destroy the Orcus staff. He needed to extract the death energy within it, then completely destroy Orcus's soul, and finally remake it into a giant executioner's sword. This wasn't going to be easy. Soren hadn't modified such a high-level divine artifact, and it seemed that it wouldn't work if he just used his divine power. This divine artifact had been given divinity by Orcus, and the enemies it killed could be directly turned into undead. Soren wanted to preserve this power. If the two-handed sword of his demon incarnation could directly kill the target and resurrect them into undead puppets, then the effect of the battle would be very terrifying. What should I do? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. P.S. It seems that the weight of the Orcus staff has caused a controversy. People think that this weight is completely unworthy of its status as a demon lord. It's so much worse than those who can blow up planets with one punch. Pure physical strength could be roughly calculated. Fu-Tu never knew how to write and couldn't write the kind of words that could destroy the world and blow up planets with one punch. The gods had the ability to destroy continents, and the Arcane Empire also had alchemy devices that could destroy continents. But some powers were like flipping a table. Once they were used, everyone was done for. Orcus's strength was the limit, and only the Centimanes could be stronger. Without taking into account the divine power of magic, the limit that the body could reach was only so much. As for the specific amount of lethality that could be broken out, only high-end data people could calculate it. However, Fu-Tu had not carefully calculated the specific conversion. If you want to be entangled, you can estimate it yourself. According to an ordinary person, a boxer. How many pounds did he carry, how many pounds did he lift, and how many pounds did he use in the final battle? Not counting his supernatural abilities. You can go and convert according to the ratio. Chapter 1056. The cold wind was howling. With the coming of the new year, the outer islands also ushered in the first heavy snow. The great war that broke out in the south of the island did not affect the harbor and the inner city, so although others heard about it, they could only know how fierce the battle was from a few people. The outside world had more speculations about the city of Mordor. When they learned that the demon army was led by Orcus, many gods' churches were shocked and quickly sent the news back. Mordor City's reaction ability and hidden trump cards were really amazing. In the case of facing the Steel Abyss Legion head-on, they were still able to protect the inner city without any losses, and they resisted this attack in just half a day. This was something that no kingdom in the material plane could do. Even if there were gods, it would be difficult. There was no doubt that the city of Mordor still had many hidden cards that they did not know. Although everything ended quickly, the pain was unbearable. However, the pain they brought was unavoidable. After the high priest cleaned up the battlefield, he sent people to organize a grand funeral. Sauron's church and believers suffered a serious blow. More than 20,000 believers died in the attack of the Abyss army. About 20 priests were killed by the liches and the undead. Although their souls could return to the kingdom of God, they were still dead after all. 3 towns that had been fully established were turned into ruins. The city of Mordor lost more than 10 million Kindler directly in this battle. It would take more resources to rebuild the towns and migrate the population in the future. This was a blatant attack. The purpose was undoubtedly to attack Sauron's power. If the city of Mordor had not reacted quickly, Sauron's church would have been destroyed in an instant. The enemy must pay the price. No matter who was behind the scenes, Sauron must make them pay the price. However, the most important thing now was to restore order in the city of Mordor and mobilize troops to guard all places. Sauron was not sure if this was the only wave of the enemy's attack. We must fight back. Sauron stood on the high platform of the great temple, listening to the prayers of the believers outside and the cries of countless souls. More than 30,000 civilians died in the city of Mordor. The souls of these civilians were collected by the temple. Because there were too many of them at once and Sauron was worried about Mingi, he could only ask the oracles from another world to send them to the Holy Kingdom in batches. Sauron suspected that this attack was orchestrated by Naruto. However, there was something wrong with Naruto attacking him so recklessly. Sauron suspected that someone else was behind this. There were many gods among the gods who wanted to test him. It's not time to make a move on Naruto yet. If I remember correctly, he will soon hold the promotion ceremony. Sauron's gaze pierced through space as he muttered, "However, since you dared to attack me, you must pay the price. Looks like it's time to start a war in the Abyss." The enemy did not make a move openly. This was the problem. Sauron could not gather the gods in the alliance to deal with Naruto. However, since Orcus attacked and was now killed by Sauron, and his soul escaped into the staff of Orcus, then he had to do something. The most valuable revenge at the moment was to cut off Orcus's wings in the Abyss. The Abyss, the third layer, the Forgotten Land. After nearly 2 months of silence, behind the Golumba Arena, in a magnificent palace built near a volcano, the heavy obsidian gate slowly opened. Later, the figure of the Baelor leader, Sauron, came out of it. Behind him were 6 Baelor who had completed their evolution. At the same time, there was also a Baelor who came to join Sauron. He came from the dark well of the bottomless abyss. He was an evil and powerful existence. Master. 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 The high-class succubus maids who had been guarding the door immediately greeted Sauron. They flapped their small demon wings to welcome him. 7 or 8 high-class succubus maids surrounded Sauron, obediently waiting for orders. The second to speak was the goblin demon warlock. Since the Golumba arena became bigger and bigger, the power of the goblins was severely weakened. Demons dominated the place, especially when more and more high-grade demons tried to join Sauron to gain power. The status of the goblins was even worse. The generosity and cruelty of Sauron the Beheader had spread throughout the Abyss. Many demons had joined the Abyss because of the temptation of benefits. This made the number of demons and goblins more and more unstable. The goblins knew very well that only Sauron could guarantee their status. Otherwise, they would have been devoured by the demons and demons long ago. The last to speak was the leader of the demon guards in the Golumba arena. He was a powerful assassin demon who was responsible for training some powerful demon guards. Sound the alarm. Summon the demon army. Sauron's burly figure came out. The wide demon wings were like a pair of dragon wings when they opened. He glanced at the assassin demon's happy expression and said slowly, "War is coming. Let us destroy. Let us conquer. Dong dong dong. The dull sound of the bell echoed throughout the Golumba arena. This bell was only rung during the most grand competition battles and when the army was summoned. There was no doubt that there was no competition now. The only explanation was that the great Baelor Lord Sauron was summoning his demon army. So, this only meant one thing in the abyss: war was coming. What was absolutely different from the material plane was that when the bell to summon the demon army rang, everyone's face was not surprised and nervous, but uncontrollable excitement and fighting spirit. Demons thirsted for war. Demons thirsted for killing. More than once, there were high-grade demons who thought that Sauron was too kind. This was not a compliment in the abyss. These high-grade demons who came over thought that Sauron should start a war. War was necessary. They needed a war to gain merit, a war to prove their strength, a war to expand their territory, and a war to strengthen themselves. All the high-grade demons who came over thought that Sauron should at least choose a secondary demon lord as an enemy. The huge demon army needed a target. They needed to eliminate enemies and plunder wealth. They also needed to use this to gain a higher status. It would be best to become a low-grade demon lord. These demons thought that the days in the Golumba arena were a bit idle. They trained every day, summoned more demons, occasionally cleaned up the wilderness and dealt with demons. These were not serious matters for the high-grade demons. The only thing they did was to fight and kill. Ha ha ha. Is the war finally going to start? A burly Baelor laughed as he rushed out of the tavern. Demons did not need ordinary food and they did not even have certain organs. Drinking was a pastime that only high-ranked demons could enjoy, and only special wine could make them feel it. This kind of wine was almost poisonous to humans. A Glabriza figure also came out of the tavern. Almost all the demons who were qualified to enter the tavern were high-grade demons. The middle-grade and low-grade demons were basically in the military camp, or they were carrying out cleaning tasks in the wilderness. The whole Golumba arena was boiling. The high-grade demons who had nothing to do appeared one after another. They either flapped their demon wings and flew into the air or directly teleported to the square. In the war against the Kingdom of Fear, a large number of new high-grade demons were born in the Golumba arena. They had been eager for new battles to make themselves stronger. The 5 six-armed snake demons quickly swam across the wide street. Their reaction speed was very fast and when they arrived they were already fully armed. At this time, in the big square of the Golumba arena, there were nearly 100 high-grade demons gathered together. At the top of the list were the 6 higher demons that stood out from the rest. They were the High Baelor O'Leary, the 6-armed snake demon leader, RYZ, the Glabriza messenger, Frost, the assassin instructor, Kryla, the goblin sorcerer, Milt, and the Soul Calibur captain, Mortier. These 6 high-grade demons all had a characteristic that was, they all wore a special magic ring on their fingers. Tap tap tap. The crisp sound of boots sounded, and the figure of the succubus boss, Renalise, also appeared. The demons came very quickly and were all very excited. Some high-grade demons whispered to each other and seemed to be guessing who the target was this time. Soon. With the breath of the raging fire, Sauron's burly figure descended from the sky. He looked down at the many high-grade demons in front of him and then slowly said, "The time for war has come. It's time for us to conquer and destroy the next target." One by one, Balrogs appeared behind Sauron. Although many high-grade demons had been guessing that the Lord had not appeared for so long because he was cultivating Balrogs, when so many Balrogs really appeared in front of them, they could not help but feel a little shocked. Orcus has fallen in the material plane. A huge beheading sword appeared in Sauron's palm. He held the flame whip and pointed to the void and said in a deep voice, "All the planes he controlled have now become ownerless. The Ghoul King Dorison betrayed Yeenagu, and now Orcus is dead again. Now this ghoul has become an old dog that has lost its claws and teeth. This is an opportunity for us. A chance to really rise in the abyss. My servants, let us summon the abyss army. Go and trample Thanatos. Go and conquer Naratel. These places belong to us. Go and summon your servants. Go and summon your allies. We want to conquer these plains. Finally, hang the head of the Ghoul King, Dorison, on the top of the palace of the White Kingdom. P.S. It's a pity that Buddha's math is not good, or I'll tell you how much impact a 1-ton weapon has at supersonic speed. Chapter 1057. The Undead King Orcus. Orcus was once immortal. No one knew the details about him when he was immortal. They only knew that he was already a bloated fatty back then and was proficient in certain spells. After his death, His soul came to the outer plane and became the lowest level of larvae, and he began his struggle in the abyss. Finally, he became one of the most powerful demons in the abyss. After Orcus became the demon lord, his infamy spread across all the planes. He claimed that he was the creator of the undead, a strange creature that was far away from the negative energy plane. Orcus became even more infamous because he knew the secret of the living dead. No one knew when Orcus began to rule over Thanatos. There were rumors that Orcus also ruled over other layers of the abyss, but it was certain that it was a long time ago. It was said that Orcus created the first batch of Death Knights, and there were a total of 12 of them. These Death Knights were all righteous men when they were alive. Orcus, who was killed by Sorin, was not in his true undead king form. This was because Orcus' stats in his peak form were very abnormal. Strength 54, Dexterity 25, Constitution 42, Intelligence 34, Wisdom 30, Charm 42. Note: the data of the Undead King's peak form will be posted in the book after this chapter. Orcus' territory was Thanatos. Thanatos was on the 113th floor of the abyss. This floor was very cold, filled with ice, thin air and gloomy moonlight. This floor belonged to the Tana demons, but it also belonged to the undead. In fact, this floor had a slight negative energy characteristic. Even so, purgatory moss and mushrooms still grew at the edge of the frozen ground. Tombstones of all kinds, imaginable and unimaginable, decorated the frozen landscape. Some stood alone, while others were gathered together randomly. It was like a small graveyard. Undead creatures were everywhere. It was not easy to reach Thanatos from the upper level of the abyss, unless one had a super advanced teleportation gate. Or else, to reach Thanatos, one had to pass through another layer, the frozen waste. The 23rd layer of the bottomless abyss was an extremely cold plain. The ice layer was several miles deep, and there was no sign of human habitation. The distant sun looked even dimmer than the moon in the physical world. The frozen moor was under the jurisdiction of the frost giants. They served the frost giant king of Coastchurch, their demon prince. The frost giant mages and their prince lived in the glacier castle. It was a castle that was built between two towering ice peaks and was on the verge of collapsing. Spring would never come to the frozen wilderness. Most of the inhabitants there lived in underground fortresses or caves. Conquering Orcus's territory was not an easy task. It took Sauron 3 days to gather his demon army. Most of the middle and low-level demons in the abyss were free-range. A Baelor stood up and then summoned his subordinates to attack the surroundings. About 3,000 demons began to clean up the surroundings. At the same time, a group of Baelors found a mountain under Sauron's command. Then they began to set up a huge magic array. The mighty abyssal army was continuously teleported over. Because it was close to the kingdom of the main body, there was no need to worry about defense. This time, Sauron gathered more than 70% of the army to attack here. The teleportation circle was constantly running. The scene that happened in Motor City was repeated. Soon, an army of nearly 100,000 demons had completed the teleportation and piled up the entire plain. But this time the undead became the invaders. Sauron led the demon army to attack here with anger and hatred. The invasion of the demons quickly alerted the undead here. The Death Knights that Orcus had once created had noticed the abnormality. They began to gather the undead and quickly set up defensive fortresses, skeletal fortresses. An army of more than 100,000 demons was densely packed on the cold plains. Countless demons anxiously waited for Sauron's order, ready to launch a full-scale war against the gathered undead. However, Sauron did not appear in the demon army. His figure led the Baelors to occupy a mountain peak. Master, the magic array has been set up. The lady boss of Succubus appeared in front of Sauron with a group of demon warlocks. Behind her was a large group of demon warlocks and demons who were good at magic. Night witches, hags, Yugros, slaughterers and so on. Very good. Sauron's huge body turned around and nodded with satisfaction. Start the ritual. A Baelor stood up. He followed the demon warlocks to the center of the magic array, which was a huge platform. The lady boss of Succubus walked in front of the Baelors with a dagger in her hand. Then she waved the dagger and pierced the Baelors' hearts. Boiling hot blood gushed out from the wound. This dagger had evil power and quickly drained the life of the Baelors in front of her. Then countless blood gushed out and flowed onto the magic array. A raging fire appeared on the magic array. The temperature around rose sharply. This was an evil sacrificial magic array. It needed the life of a Baelors to start. Sauron's huge body entered the interior of the mountain through a dug passage. This passage went thousands of meters underground and connected to the magma vein. His huge body slowly entered the magma pool. On the magic array outside the mountain peak, the life of the Balers was completely drained. A surge of magic poured into the magic array and passed to Sauron's body at the same time. Burn. Spurt. Obey my call. Elves from the fire plane. Expel the coldness of this world. Bring the scorching heat here. In the name of Sauron, the Baler Lord. Elves from the fire plane. Erupt your anger and scorching heat. Use the scorching heat to dispel the coldness here. Chapter 1058. The earth trembled. The volcano that Sauron ignited erupted in a prince-style manner. This was considered the most powerful form of volcanic eruption. It could spray volcanic ash up to 45 kilometers in the air and cover a large area. This type of volcanic eruption could form a powerful pyroclastic flow. Its characteristic was volcanic gas and volcanic ash that was ejected into the stratosphere. A short eruption could end in a day, but it could also last for days or even months. A longer eruption would start with the formation of gray clouds. Sometimes it would be accompanied by a pyroclastic flow. It could spew out large amounts of lava and cause the crater to collapse, forming a crater. The fine ash could cover a large area. Due to the uniqueness of the plane, Sauron could not turn this place into a supervolcano even if he sacrificed a Balrog. However, there was no doubt that this violent eruption had completely changed some of the characteristics of this plane. This was because the negative energy characteristic given by Orcus was gradually injected with a trace of characteristics from the fire elemental plane under the guidance of Sauron's huge power and the interference of the elves from the Land of Flames. As mentioned before, all planes had channels that connected to the elemental plane. Thanatos was injected with characteristics from the negative energy plane, allowing low-level undead to automatically revive in this plane. When souls entered this plane, they would not become demon worms due to the cold environment and negative energy. Instead, they would become many undead such as skeletons, zombies, Boda corpses, and so on. This was not what Sauron needed. He did not need undead, nor did he need undead that could continuously revive and grow stronger through killing. The tributary of the river Styx passed through this plane. Under the influence of Orcus' power, more than 90% of the souls in this plane would become undead. The remaining layer would become demons and be quickly destroyed by the undead. Therefore, there were tens of millions of undead wandering here. Of course, most of the undead were like abyssal worms. They were weak and needed tens of thousands of battles to produce a high-grade undead. This was an undead farm. Volcanic ash covered a large area of land. The sky darkened, but the temperature did not get colder. Sauron's flame elves had caused the ground to heat up. At the same time, because the channel to the fire elemental plane had been opened, the magma layer in this world was rapidly expanding. As long as this formation was maintained, the characteristics of the plane would gradually change. Transforming a plane wasn't an easy task. If it was done by the main body, it might be faster. However, Sauron needed some time to accumulate experience. We can attack now. Sauron's naked figure walked out of the lava pool at the top. The succubus maids on both sides quickly walked over and put a cloak on him. The rapidly rising temperature made the Balrogs excited. Under the leadership of the Baler, Sauron's main demon army began to advance. Sauron did not intend to participate in this battle. Because it was difficult for him to improve his strength by killing low-level undead, he had more important things to do. Have people prepare the soul crystals. Sauron opened his huge demonic wings and soared into the sky. Then he ordered the succubus lady boss, summon the goblin demon warlock. We can start preparing for the real ceremony now. This was a plain war. Just killing some undead would not determine the real victory. What Sauron needed was to completely control this plane. Inside the portal, a large number of soul crystals were transported out. These were the spoils of war from the Boda corpses and ghosts that the demon army had destroyed. These relatively ordinary soul crystals had other uses. They were the key to determining whether Sauron could rule this plane. A fierce battle had broken out. The demon army of more than 100,000 began to advance toward the Bone Fortress. All the high-grade demons led their subordinates to fight the Death Knights. For a moment, the entire plain had turned into a battlefield. At this moment, there were already millions of undead gathered. If they were to compare the number of cannon fodder, the undead were no less than the demons. Not to mention there were countless corpses in this plain. Under the summoning of the Lich, a large number of skeletons and skeleton warriors were immediately resurrected. It was as if there was no end to them. The characteristics of the plane still gave them abilities. Under the effect of the characteristics of the plane, Thanatos undead spells could be enhanced by 1 to 3 casting levels. After all, this was Orcus territory. Sauron spread his huge demonic wings and flew to the border of the plane. There were already hundreds of goblin demon warlocks waiting here. Some powerful night witches and Anababas were also waiting for Sauron to bring them here. We can begin. Sauron nodded at a legendary level Yugoloth. Immediately after, the Yugoloth ordered its subordinates to summon a boat of the river Styx. The Yugoloth had always been one of the ferrymen of the river Styx. Only they could easily come into contact with the river Styx. Do it, the Yugoloth roared. Then the earth shook violently. A crack appeared on the border of the land. The river Styx's water flowed into the land through the crack. A huge pit appeared in front of them. There were countless runes around it. These were all set up by the goblin demon warlocks, night witches and Anababas. The river Styx's water flowed into it. Countless undead wailed. With the help of the Yugoloth, a huge pool of the river Styx appeared in front of Sauron. The rich power of death filled the air. Sauron slowly came to the huge pool and took out a bottle of dark red liquid. This was the essence from the Abyss blood pool. Sauron opened the crystal bottle in his hand and poured the essence of the Abyss blood pool into the pool of the river Styx. He then cut open his palm and roared, "Chaos!" The demon lord's blood fell into the pool. The entire pool of the river Styx suddenly boiled crazily. Countless souls wailed in it. The dark red essence of the blood pool spread at a speed visible to the naked eye. With the help of Sauron's demon lord's blood, the pool of the river Styx was quickly dyed red. The passage in the distance had been sealed. Under the effect of the essence of the blood pool, the pool of the river Styx was quickly assimilated into a huge pool of blood. Pour in the soul crystals. The demons carried baskets of low-grade soul crystals and tossed them into the newly formed blood pool. Then bubbles appeared in the center of the blood pool. Countless pieces of flesh and blood churned and combined at a speed visible to the naked eye. The scene was extremely disgusting and terrifying. The first abyssal worm was born. It crawled out of the pool of blood and then frantically pounced on another abyssal worm that was born next to it. This was the power of the law of the abyss. After the birth of any blood pool, the first thing to do was to give birth to a new mother worm. Sauron accelerated this process. Under the effect of a large number of soul crystals, thousands of abyssal worms were quickly born. Then they crazily devoured and evolved under the eyes of the demons. A trace of power was extracted by the pool of blood. Just as Sauron created this huge pool of blood, the resurrection spells of the high-grade undead on the battlefield in the distance were weakened a lot. The number of undead that they could resurrect was greatly reduced. And the souls wandering in Thanatos were drawn to the abyss blood pool in the distance by some force. Chapter 1060. Six-armed Marillion were true killing machines. These terrifying creatures were 20 feet long and weighed around 4,000 pounds. They had around 30 points of strength and dexterity, as well as abilities such as defense, battle reflex, multi-attack, multi-weapon combat, violent attack, and so on. Unlike Sorin's dual-wielding, six-armed Marillion could use up to 6 weapons at once. They also had spells such as Blade Barrier, Shadow Projection, Polymorph, Evil Aura, and so on. In this world, Aura was equivalent to a halo effect. It was a special ability that covered a certain area, and was very effective in battle. When the 6-armed snake demons under Sauron's command stepped into the battlefield, they saw the undead in front of them being cut down in batches like wheat being harvested. In a large-scale battle in the abyss, Only the flame fiends with their AoE body of flames could compare to the six-armed Marillion. However, many creatures had fire resistance, so the six-armed Marillion's damage was higher than the flame fiends. Succubus and Vrock followed behind the six-armed Marillion. Their mission wasn't to fight, but to collect the soul crystals dropped by the undead. The power of laws in this plane had been disrupted, which led to a higher probability of dropping soul crystals. The soul flames in the pupils of many undead immediately extinguished after death, and then quickly formed into fingernail-sized gray crystals. These were all soul crystals of lower quality. After the succubus maid sent the collected soul crystals to the abyssal blood pool, every time a batch of soul crystals was thrown in, the water in the blood pool would churn on a large scale. Then, countless flesh and blood would combine to form abyssal worms. These abyssal worms would kill each other and become new demons. The entire battle lasted for almost a day. Sauron's demons were swapped out in 3 batches, and the number of undead in front of them was greatly reduced. There were only around 200,000 of them left. The demon army had lost around 30 to 50,000. However, most of the low-ranked demons died, while the high-ranked ones had very few casualties. This was because most of the high-ranked demons could teleport and fly. More importantly, such a large-scale battle was clearly in accordance with the power of laws of the abyss. Some of the demons automatically absorbed the soul power of the enemies when they died, and a new batch of middle-grade and high-grade demons was rapidly born in the slaughter. Now that the remaining undead were relatively powerful, Sauron did not intend to continue wasting cannon fodder. Let's get rid of these enemies. Sauron finally stepped onto the battlefield, and behind him was a group of flame imps. Raging Flame Body was activated. With Sauron as the center, the area within a radius of more than 100 meters turned into a sea of fire. However, after Orcus was declared dead, a drow god of vengeance and immortality claimed to own the spoils of war as the victor and the corresponding jurisdiction of the plane, as well as the jewel on the crown of the plane, Later. However, there were convincing clues that Orcus was not dead as many people thought. He seemed to have rarely died and was resurrected once. Later, the drow god suddenly disappeared, and no one knew if she escaped or was killed. Later. This was a land that even the evil gods coveted. When Sauron's demon army arrived at this place through the portal, they immediately saw many iconic buildings of Later. The huge and magnificent mausoleums, some of which covered an area of dozens of acres, had many underground passages. In the distance, there were tall obelisks that reached into the clouds. In Later, this was a symbol because there were dozens of obelisks that reached into the clouds, and the tallest one was close to 300 meters. Legend said that this was something left behind from ancient times, and some said that it was a huge magic circle that Orcus spent thousands of years to set up. Chapter 1061. This was the real kingdom of death. There was a negative energy aura here that was close to the underworld. When Sauron's demon army arrived, a black mass of zombies, ghouls, zombies, Boda corpses, and carrion immediately gathered in front of them. There were so many of them that it was as if there was no end to them. However, these were not the real problem. The high-tier undead that had been left behind by some force to guard Naratel had appeared. Giant demon-hunting spiders crawled out of the mausoleum, vampiric giants walked out from the city walls, some liches appeared near the obelisk, and many ancient vampires crawled out from the deepest part of the tomb. These were the real guards of Orcus. They were bound here just like the Balers hovering near the Silver Palace. The demon lord used a special method to make them guard his territory. It looks like a tough battle. Sauron stepped forward. Behind him, a huge demon army had gathered. The number of enemies was still very large, and the increasing number of high-grade undead meant that they would have to pay a high price to occupy this place. Prepare the portal. Sauron looked up at the sky and said, even the middle and high-grade demons had almost no guarantee. There were too many enemies. They were fighting against the devil's army, enemies, even every inch of land they occupied needed to be wiped out with demon blood. In this case, he could only rely on the power of forward like sharp knives. The enemies were very dense. But this time they suffered casualties. Although there were many of them, in the case of slaughtering so many undead, this was a good thing because Sauron had almost a good way to deal with casualties. This could weaken the enemy's power to the greatest extent. Several six-armed Marafians were killed by the vampire giants. It seemed that some kind of magic circle had been activated. The place was shrouded in an unusually strong negative energy. Stepped into the battlefield. Fortunately, Orcus did not master the power of the same time, because some Balers felt that there might be something similar to a lock in the center of the huge magic circle. Every inch of land was in a battle. It was as if the towers of the northern witches had just combined to form a massive maze, and they were immediately counterattacked by the high-grade undead. They were guarding this
because
place.
Orcus was dead,
this was their mission.
the Liches did not
Anyone who
activate their
attacked would
ability.
be attacked by them.
Mordor City.
In the arcane tower, Soren's low voice sounded, "Activate the teleportation device. Lock onto the spatial waymark."
They had something that demons did not
Activate
have.
the elemental
And that
furnace.
was discipline.
Activate Mies's
The lethality
nucleus.
of tens of
A
thousands
series
of
of
heroic
orders were
spirits
given.
in the battle was
With
comparable
Thaling's
to
help,
that of
the
hundreds
steel
of thousands
golems
of
quickly
demons.
got to work.
They were like
activating
reapers
the
tearing
energy
apart
switches
and
and
destroying the
activating the
undead in
charging
front of them
system
in
of the
batches.
arcane tower.
Although there were still
Super
casualties,
magic pulse
the
pulse
ratio
cannon
was much
charged
less
and
than that of the
activated.
demon army.
The entire
Some of the
arcane tower
chaotic and
trembled.
crazy demons
Then
had already
a ray
rushed
of light
to the rear
appeared
of
at
the
the
enemy.
top of the arcane
When these
tower.
high-grade demons
The
came back,
superconducting
they
manifold
formed an
cannon
encirclement
quickly
with
lit
the
up.
army of
A
heroic
huge
spirits.
amount of energy
The
gathered,
otherworldly
and then
god
a portal
envoys had more
opened on its
combat power
firing
than the
path.
Balers.
Activate
Their gray
the
wings
interdimensional
escaped into the
energy
shadows
strike
and
system.
constantly killed the
Activate
Liches
the
and ancient
interdimensional
vampires
tactical
in
strike
sight.
device.
These otherworldly god envoys were all given divine power by Soren. They were at least high-grade legends. A few of them had reached the level of demigod after experiencing the battle in the Kingdom of Fear. These otherworldly god servants were very powerful. The only disadvantage was that they could not leave the Kingdom of God for too long. Every time they left the Kingdom of God, they would need to consume the accumulated divine power in the Kingdom of God. The Balers also stepped on the battlefield. Sauron waved a flame whip that was 50 or 60 meters long, and with a giant beheading sword in his other hand, he rushed into the interior of the undead. An ancient vampire was slain by him, and then another high-level lich entered his field of vision. There was no technique to speak of in the battle. The enemy was an undead that had no fear or pain. The final battle was a bloody war of attrition. Until night fell. Sauron could see that all the undead had fallen, and there were corpses of demons everywhere. His army had also paid a heavy price. Roar! Excited cheers sounded. After most of the undead had been killed, the high-grade demons under Sauron's command roared fanatically. Sauron opened his huge demonic wings, and his figure rose into the air. He roared, "We won. From today on this place belongs to us. From Thanatos to Naratel, it's all our territory." Roars of fanaticism sounded from all directions. Even the stupidest demon knew that they had won. A huge territory. They had occupied a level. After paying a huge price, they finally took down the 113th floor of the abyss. "Master." The tall figure of the succubus owner appeared behind Sauron. Her leather armor was stained with blood. It seemed that she had also joined the battle. She knelt down on one knee in front of Sauron and said, "About 50% of the demon army has died. But we have obtained a huge number of soul stones. We should be able to recover soon." The goblin demon warlocks found countless rare materials in Naratel's warehouse. At the same time, there are about 100 legendary soul stones. We have controlled some of the Lich's phylacteries. They are now sealed around the portal. Master, you should deal with them first. Chapter 1063. In the depths of Nalatel. Sauron saw a pile of strange lich phylacteries. The most obvious feature was that they looked almost the same. There was no doubt about it. These liches were all man-made, and the purpose of their existence was to protect Nalatel. Sauron picked up a dark golden lich phylactery and immediately felt a control circle. Orcus created these liches and controlled their souls. As long as he controlled the phylactery, he could control these liches. However, the price of doing so was that these liches lost the ability to evolve. They were not liches transformed from legendary mages. After their phylacteries were controlled, it was impossible for them to evolve into demigod liches. They had been guarding Nalatel for a long time, so their strength and potential had been limited. On the other side was a whole box of legendary soul crystals. Nalatel was the territory of the undead. The most common thing here was soul crystals. The undead were the creatures that dropped the most natural soul crystals. Looks like a good harvest. On the other side of the treasury there were a lot of materials. The undead did not care about gold or silver, so most of the materials here were gems and rare minerals. In the long years of running Nalatel, the undead had thoroughly explored this plane and found a lot of valuable minerals. Sauron saw a lot of mithril, adamantine, thorium, astral stones, arcanite ingots and so on. These were all materials made by the liches. Some rare materials from the astral world could be found at the edge of the abyss. In the center of Nalatel was a huge fortress, and there was a huge control circle inside the fortress. Sure enough. Sauron stepped on the circle in front of him and immediately felt that the obelisks in all directions were under his control. They had a special function because these obelisks could gather the power of death. Orcus really wants to get his hands on the godhood of death. The power of the obelisks gathered the power of death. This was the key to Orcus becoming the king of undead. What a pity. Sauron quickly walked down and shook his head. Just with the power of death, without a godhood and believers, it is impossible to compete with the real god of death. But this gave Orcus the characteristic of being undead. The number of spoils was huge. Some of them would stay in the bottomless abyss, while the other would be sent to Moder City. As for the most critical batch of legendary soul crystals, Sauron only kept about 1/5 of them, and sent the rest to Moder City. After Moder City developed a diamond planet, most of the conditions for building a diamond golem had been met. The only thing missing was high-level soul crystals. These legendary soul crystals were enough to create a large number of top-tier diamond golems. They could even be used to create advanced versions of the diamond golems, which were the legendary constructs that protected the arcane towers. They were a weakened version of Thaling. They did not have the supportability of Thaling, and most of their functions were used for fighting and killing. The Devil Legion had suffered heavy casualties. With such a large number of casualties, Sauron had no choice but to postpone his plan to attack Ghoul King Dor-Isen. Instead, he began infecting some lesser demon lords. The territory he controlled now was already very large. The huge territory from Thanatos to Later was enough for Sauron to infect more than a dozen lesser demon lords, but he did not do so. Instead, he selected 7 demon lords and promoted them to lesser demon lords. Each level of the bottomless abyss was big and small. The 113th level of Thanatos was relatively medium-sized, and it was enough for Sauron to infect a group of lesser demon lords. However, while Thanatos could be given away, Later definitely couldn't. There were still many secrets in this place. Furthermore, the death energy here was abnormally dense. Orcus had practically turned this place into half a divine kingdom. The secrets of these obelisks must not be known by other demons. Sauron was ready to control this place himself, and at the same time, study how Orcus obtained the power of death. Orcus had many powers that only the god of death had, such as the Hand of Death, the resurrection of the undead, and so on. At the same time, the staff of Orcus could directly turn the target it killed into the undead. This power was not easy even for the god of death. On the other side, in the distant city of Moder, just after Sauron broke through the last fortress of Later, Sorin opened his eyes in an instant. A golden ray of light shot out from his eyes. Finally, it's time. Sorin's figure stood up, and the light of divine power gathered all over his body. He looked like a golden armored giant. He stretched out his hand toward the sky, and all the temples on the island of Moder suddenly rang loudly. Then countless power of faith converged toward the great temple, and a majestic divine power was mobilized and condensed by him. Divine molding. Change form. Sorin was holding the staff of Orcus in his hand. During this time, he had been staying in the temple to crack the secrets of this artifact. When Later was broken, some kind of blessing on the artifact was broken in an instant. Shrill screams were heard. Just after Sorin broke the protection of the staff of Orcus, the screams of countless souls suddenly sounded. This was an extremely evil divine artifact. Just like the famous Frostmourne, the essence of the staff of Orcus was to turn any dead creature into the undead, and at the same time, imprison the souls of many mortals. Over the long years, the divine artifact had imprisoned too many souls. The evil power it possessed was not much weaker than that of Orcus himself, because every time Orcus was resurrected, he would have to obtain the divine artifact to truly come back to rush towards Sorin. This was the backlash of the artifact, and it was also Orcus' last resistance. If a mortal faced such an attack, they would almost certainly die. If someone accidentally destroyed the artifact with Mage's Disjunction, they would almost immediately die under the backlash. However, Sorin was a true god after all, and a true god close to the great divine power. In the face of the black fog formed by countless wraiths, he just raised his hand in the sky, and then a light gate appeared in front of him. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Sorin stretched out his hand toward the void, and immediately tens of thousands of wraiths were caught by him. Then he waved his hand toward the light gate in front of him, and a huge suction force burst out. Screams of horror were heard. Countless wraiths were forcibly sucked into the light gate, sent into Sorin's kingdom, and then thrown into the pool of reincarnation. Finally, cracks appeared on the staff of Orcus, and a human soul that looked a little fat appeared in front of Sorin. This was the original body of Orcus, and also his appearance when he was a mortal. Chapter 1064. No. The human soul that looked a little fat in front of him roared unwillingly, but Soren's expression did not change at all. He did not hesitate to reach out and grab the soul in front of him, then crushed him directly. A huge amount of soul energy exploded. Orcus's power turned into countless divine lights and poured into Soren's body. A row of data appeared in front of him. You have killed the undead king Orcus, soul form. Extracting the target's soul energy. You have gained 150000 slaughter EXP. Extracting the target's divine power. You have gained 10 divinity points. Extracting the target's divine power. You have gained 5 divine power. Devour the target's divine power. You have gained the undead trait. Your death domain has been upgraded. You have gained the additional ability, Undead Summon. You have gained the additional ability, Undead Summon. A wave of death energy blended into Soren's body. Orcus's weak soul was crushed without hesitation. At the same time, along with Orcus's complete death, a special undead trait was also absorbed by Soren. Undead trait. Your soul has seen through the mystery of death, which allows you to escape death. This is a power that only gods can have. When your physical body dies, your soul can use external objects to revive you. The undead trait makes your soul stronger. It seems that only the real Grim Reaper can kill you. The source of Orcus's revival. Soren seemed to have felt something, and then a smile appeared on his face. It seems that Orcus is a little unfortunate. After gaining the undead trait, Soren finally understood why Orcus kept reviving. It was because of this ability to see through the mystery of death that many people could not completely kill Orcus after killing him. However, Soren was different from others. He had inherited the power of the 3 gods of death, and this was what Orcus was most afraid of. Only the Grim Reaper could really kill him. Soren's power happened to meet this requirement. Otherwise, the other gods could only imprison and seal Orcus's soul, just like what others did in the past. This trait doesn't seem to be useful to me. Soren frowned and muttered, the form of a true god can be revived. As long as it's not during the Avatar Crisis or in the Abyss Blood War, the possibility of a god being revived is very high. Furthermore, the Grim Reaper can eliminate the undead trait and kill the target. For now. There are quite a lot of gods with the clergy of death active in the material plane. This was a trait was basically useless. Unless Soren killed all the gods with the clergy of death, this trait was completely useless. Fortunately, after killing Orcus, Soren's domain of death was upgraded again, and at the same time the domain of undead was extended. Chapter 1065. I only need 15 more divinity points to become a great divine power. For Soren, the greatest joy he got from killing Orcus was not the undead's ability, but the fact that he was one step closer to becoming a great divine power. Currently, Soren's divinity points were 505, which was more than most intermediate gods. Even if he was compared to a great divine power, he would not be too far behind. Moreover, Soren's demon avatar still had some divinity points. Although it was not a lot, it would not be a problem for him to accumulate about 550 divinity points. After all, there were many demons in the abyss who had a trace of divinity. Then there was Soren's divinity points. After a long period of accumulation, his divinity points had reached 285. This meant that as long as Soren killed an enemy of low to medium divine power, he could directly advance to the level of great divine power. Who else? Soren searched deep in his memory for a god that was most likely to be killed and least likely to offend. For now, the undead calamity had reached its final stage. This stage was a period of rebellion, which meant that many undead had lost control and started to go berserk. The reason for this was that Naruto had given up on controlling these undead and was preparing to absorb the power of death to become a great divine power. Clemvox's eternal rest domain had been shattered. This last wave of the undead calamity could be divided into 3 parts, which were the 3 epic quests that the adventurers participated in. The first part was related to the Red Robe Wizards. The Red Robe Wizards' chief necromancer, Sarzastan, was a powerful demigod lich. He led many of the remaining Red Robe Wizards to attack the Tori region. Because the Red Robe Wizards were almost destroyed, the remaining wizards were necromancers and liches. Therefore, this part of the battle affected the entire Tori region. The gods involved included the Lady of Silver Moon, the goddess of aristocracy, the god of craftsmanship, and the god of suffering. The churches of these gods secretly intervened to stop the Red Robe Wizards, and the high-grade adventurers also accepted this epic quest. In the end, Sarzastan died and the Red Robe Wizards returned to the world of undead. But now it was hard to say. It mainly depended on whether the other gods would personally take action. After all, there were not that many adventurers now. The second part of the quest was about the retaliation of the dragon cultists and the dragon witchcraft sect. Soren had already dealt a heavy blow to this part of the quest. Moreover, there were already dragons from the good faction attacking the members of the dragon witchcraft sect. Therefore, this part of the epic level quest should be the least difficult. With other giant dragons involved, the dragon witch cult would not be able to do much. Besides, Naruto did not have the time to help them. The third part was the key. Klemvox and the goddess of magic used to be lovers, and he was considered the kindest of the gods of death. At the same time, he had a good relationship with the Lady of Silver Moon. However, because of his teachings, Klemvox was very hostile in the eyes of the undead and evil creatures. The realm of eternal rest made many of the undead turn their backs on him. Originally, the believers of Mirko defected to the world of souls because of his teachings and the realm of eternal rest. Soren pondered and murmured, Sirik has many enemies and now he has almost no allies. Apart from his own cunning, he is the weakest one. Naruto is the real enemy. Not only does he control most of the underworld, but he also has the support of many undead kings, and the strength of his own church is very strong. But he also has a weakness, that is, his teachings are more extreme and he is a god from another world. Even if he has been here for thousands of years, it does not change his nature as a god from another world. If I really want to fight for the priesthood of death, then personal strength is not the most important point. The ownership of the underworld determines the structure of the multiverse. The believers of the gods have to be transported through the river Styx. In the end, many gods with great divine power may intervene in the outcome of the priesthood of death. In this case, if I really want to fight for the position of the god of death, then lobbying the other gods is imperative. The interests involved in death were too great. After all, Soren's foundation was still a little shallow. If he wanted to join this competition, he must first try to lobby the other gods. Chapter 1066. The new year was coming to an end. It was getting closer and closer to Naruto's final promotion ceremony. Mordor City began to rebuild after the war. Because of the demon attack, a large number of civilians died, which forced the city hall to relocate the population again. Fortunately, Soren's initial layout had been completed. The council of the city hall had taken over most of the secular management power, and Gloria was at the helm, so some trivial things did not need Soren to deal with. At present, the secular power class of Mordor City had been born. They were performing their duties honestly under the pressure of the gods, but how long they could last would take time to test. After handing over many things to others and telling the Fallen which to try to master the power of the goddess of pestilence, Soren began his very important journey. The Frost Kingdom Arendelle. This was Soren's first destination. Compared to other gods, Princess Royal had the closest relationship with him, and the two sides had cooperated the most times. At this moment, in the depths of the palace of Arendelle, Soren and Princess Royal stood side by side. Are you really going to compete for the priesthood of death? Princess Royal frowned and looked at Soren and said slowly, this is not a trivial matter. The gods are watching all this silently. It's very dangerous to get involved at this time. One wrong step and you may lose everything. Soren nodded and said, I know. But an opportunity like this might not even come once in thousands of years. If I shrink back this time, I'll be in trouble. If I retreat now, I'm afraid I'll have to face the new god of death in the future. After all, I inherited part of the power of the three gods of death. At that time, both Vivian and I will be in danger. I know it's very dangerous to get involved, but I have to try anyway. I'm going to try to persuade the other gods. If I can get their approval, maybe the final difficulty will be less. But what I need most now is your support. After that, Soren looked up at Princess Royal's eyes, waiting for her answer. Princess Royal fell into deep thought. After a long time, she raised her head and looked at Soren. She slowly said, since you've already made your decision, why don't you leave? I will support you. Thank you. Soren was a little emotional and he couldn't help but give Princess Royal a hug. The most crucial step had already been taken. With the support of the Princess Royal, Soren now had a 30% chance of winning. What he needed to do next was to increase his chances of winning even more. Don't celebrate too early. Princess Royal took a few steps back without batting an eyelid. She did not look as calm as she appeared to be. If you really want to compete with Naruto and Clemvox for the priesthood of death, then you need to convince at least 3 more people. Soren nodded when he heard that. Princess Royal gave him an encouraging look and said, "Go and prepare. If you want to convince them, you have to pay a price." In the southern region, Harvest City. When Soren's figure stepped into this beautiful secret realm, the figure of the goddess of agriculture appeared in front of him. Next to her were the goddess of river and the goddess of spring water. The goddess of agriculture seemed a little surprised by Soren's sudden visit. She could not help but wonder, "I heard that Mordor City was attacked by demons. Shouldn't you be in Mordor City at this time? Why did you suddenly think of coming here?" The goddess of agriculture gently waved her hand, and emerald green vines automatically grew from the ground to form several rattan chairs. Her tall figure lay on them and looked at Soren. "Let me guess. You always don't come to the temple for no reason, so this time you must be here for—" She seemed to have thought of something. The goddess of agriculture suddenly raised her head and looked at Soren in surprise and murmured, "Are you going to intervene in the struggle between Naruto and Clemvox?" A smart goddess. Sometimes talking to smart people needs to be straightforward, so Soren nodded and said, "Yes. It's not easy. You're still too young among the gods." The goddess of agriculture frowned and said, "As far as I know, although Clemvox has not appeared for a long time after being ambushed by Naruto, in fact, I secretly learned from many channels that Clemvox has been in contact with many gods. He also draws allies among the gods. Clemvox is very smart. He knows that Naruto is not welcomed by other gods, and many of the gods don't want Naruto to be in charge of the underworld." Soren looked at the goddess of agriculture in front of him and said slowly, "I'm more suitable than them." The goddess of agriculture smiled and shook her head, "But other gods won't believe this. As a true god you rose too quickly. Many gods don't know you well enough and they won't trust you. And you rose by killing other gods. To be honest, many of the gods are afraid of you." Soren also smiled and said, "Isn't that good? Fear can help me solve some problems." The goddess of agriculture frowned slightly and said, "Are you serious?" "Very serious." Soren nodded. At this time, the goddess of agriculture finally fell silent. She pondered for a while and then said, "I have to say this is very difficult. Because you're too young, not many gods are willing to stand on your side." Soren nodded and said, "I know. So I need your help. Naruto is too extreme. He must pay the price for this huge disaster in the material plane. Because of his ambition, countless creatures died in vain, and all these sins must be borne by him. And Clemvox has already proved his dereliction of duty. If it weren't for his doctrine and bigotry, many undead kings wouldn't have stood on Naruto's side, and this disaster wouldn't have affected countless people. He has already failed once. Even if he regains the clergy of death, the relationship between Clemvox and the undead king still can't be eased, and even the underworld won't return to his control in a short time." The goddess of agriculture was silent. After a while she looked up and stared at Soren and slowly said, "Why did you find me? Do you want me to persuade my father?" "Yes." Soren nodded. If one wanted to control the clergy of death, the god of light was an unavoidable obstacle. Although the god of light's focus was on Asmodeus, the underworld controlled the entire lower plane. The god of light would definitely be involved in who the clergy of death belonged to. Furthermore, according to the original historical progress, the god of light had dealt a heavy blow to the god of death, Nero, and made him pay a painful price for his evil deeds. Soren couldn't win over or even take the initiative to contact the god of light. But the goddess of agriculture could do this. So whether or not he could get the support of the goddess of agriculture was the key. If the goddess of agriculture was willing to stand on his side, Soren's chances of winning would be at least 50%. Chapter 1067. From the sun god to the light of dawn to the god of light. Luashanda played a very important role in the history of the gods. He could even be said to be one of the protagonists in the history of the gods. From the beginning of the calamity of dawn to the destruction of the arcane empire, Luashanda occupied an absolute dominant position among the gods. He represented the part of goodness, light, and justice. Even the queen of spiders, Lolth, whom Soren had always been afraid of, did not dare to make a fart in front of this ancient god. This was because Luashanda was now close to a symbol among the gods, especially after the fall of the original god of justice, Tyr. After the god of light integrated the clergy of justice into himself, His existence was even more revered by the gods. Luashanda had a lot of clergy. In the past, she once had the priesthoods of movement, birth, creativity, dawn, revival, self-protection, spring, vitality, youth, and so on. But she later took these priesthoods and assigned them to other gods. The spring priesthoods of the goddess of agriculture were inherited from her father, and the light of dawn was also given by Roshanda. By now, Roshander's priesthood had been reduced a lot, and his core priesthood had changed to light and justice. He was now the combined form of the sun god and the god of justice, and was currently the most powerful god. In the past, this god's overly aggressive altruism and selflessness hindered his pursuit of goodness. His arrogance and fanaticism covered his thoughts, making him unable to see the inevitable results of his actions. He pursued perfection, but was headstrong and refused to listen to the opinions of others. These shortcomings were fully revealed during the Dawn Calamity, but it was also the Great Calamity that was second only to the Time of Troubles that changed him. At that time, Luashanda intended to rebuild a new divine system, but it ended up causing a divinity impact. His failure destroyed several gods and powerful otherworld creatures, caused the collapse of many theocratic countries, and indirectly led to the destruction of the city of Song, Maze Zeno. This failure allowed Luashanda to grow, and when the Arcane Empire was destroyed, the sacrifice of the father of the oak tree completely changed the god of light. Now, there was no god who could fight against the god of light alone. Even the ancient Lady of Night was in awe of him. Soren needed the support of the goddess of agriculture. This was because he knew very well that even if he had advanced to become a great divine power, it would still be very difficult for him to be a match for the god of light. Without the support of the god of glory, this plan would become extremely difficult. Due to his deep hatred for the undead creatures, Roshander had made Klemvox the ally of the god of eternal rest before he became the god of light. Although there were some conflicts between the two during the plan to destroy the god of tyranny, Bane, and cracks appeared again during the Arcane Empire, the god of light still supported Klemvox. That was the problem. If Klemvox still had the support of the god of light, then history would repeat itself. The god of light had appeared and dealt a heavy blow to Naruto, and had indirectly helped Klemvox regain his priesthood. This was not what Soren wanted to see. Klemvox had already proved his dereliction of duty. The turmoil of the undead meant that his doctrine was not in line with the lower planes. Even the ancient god of death, Jurgil, was a little disappointed in this. At present, only the goddess of agriculture could persuade the god of light. Mother Gaia had retired, Father Oak had fallen, and the entire natural divine system had collapsed. Today, the only one who maintained a close relationship with the god of light and could persuade him was the goddess of agriculture. She was the daughter of Mother Gaia and was also the interface between the natural divine system and the human divine system. Harvest City in the half-bit wall of the secret realm. The goddess of agriculture pondered for a long time under Soren's gaze. After a while, a bitter smile appeared on her face and she slowly said, "My relationship with my father is not very good." After Mother Gaia retired, the goddess of agriculture rarely dealt with the god of light, especially after Roshander entered the depths of Mountain Paradise. She thought that her father had completely changed. In the past, although Roshander was a little reckless and opinionated, he was full of enthusiasm, kindness, and vitality. However, since Father Oak sacrificed himself to save the material plane, Roshander had become another existence. He had all the memories of the past Roshander, but even his daughter, the goddess of agriculture, felt strange. Roshander was even more pure. The god of light now seemed perfect, but the goddess of agriculture knew that this was because her father gave up a part of his humanity in exchange. The gods in this world kept their humanity to maintain their vitality, but Roshander now seemed to have been assimilated by light and justice. If the priesthood dominated the gods, then the part of humanity would be missing. As a new god, Soren did not have such an understanding. It would take at least 1,000 years for Soren to feel this. Silence. The goddess of agriculture pondered and considered the gains and losses. After a long time she said, "I can try to help you persuade my father, but I can't guarantee success." Soren smiled and nodded. That's enough. Even if he could not get the support of the god of light, as long as he would not be hostile to him in the process of fighting for the priesthood of death, it would be enough. The goddess of agriculture thought for a moment and said, "If you take over the priesthood of death, how do you plan to fulfill your duties? You must know that this is very important. The believers of the gods have to go to the underworld after death, and the gods of death have always maintained the ancient covenant to be responsible for sending the believers of the gods to the divine kingdom. Also, Many gods are very unfriendly to the undead, but with Clemvox's dereliction of duty, you must balance the position of the undead. This was crucial. To persuade the god of light, Soren had to prove that he was worthy of support. However, Soren already had a plan for this. He thought for a moment and said, Naruto's doctrine is too extreme. He hates life and wants to destroy it. He is too biased towards the undead, which is something that all gods do not want to see. However, Kalemver's teachings are too biased towards the living. His church has always been dedicated to keeping the undead in eternal slumber. Countless undead have been killed by his believers. This has caused his relationship with most of the undead to become tense and hostile. I think in the current situation, a doctrine of the mean is more conducive to the current situation. In my opinion, the realm of eternal sleep is necessary, otherwise the material plane will be overrun with undead sooner or later. But for the undead there is no need to expel and kill them like Clemvox. The most important thing now should be to clarify the boundary between death and immortality. The current chaotic situation is like a repeat of the time of the three gods of death. During the time of Mirko there was the current chaos. Clemvox hated most of the undead and thought that they should be destroyed. For me, the most important thing is to distinguish between death and immortality. As long as the world of the living is not disturbed, there will naturally be a place for the undead to stay in the lower plane. If possible, I hope to divide an area between the underworld and the spiritual world to temporarily appease the undead. As for the future, we can slowly solve it. Soren actually had another set of ideas in mind, but he could not mention it at the moment because it would change the structure of the lower plane, especially the underworld. Now, the most suitable way was a more doctrine of the mean. Dividing the boundary between death and life? The goddess of agriculture smiled and said softly, if that's the case, I think I have a better chance of persuading my father. The god of light hated all undead. But the existence of the undead could not be erased at all. If Soren really intended to draw a clear boundary between death and life, so that the world of the living would not be disturbed by the undead, then it was very possible to get the support of the god of light. After all, Clemvox's failure had proved that one could not blindly destroy and suppress the undead. Now, the catastrophe of the undead was the revenge of many undead lords for the past. For thousands of years, Clemvox had been working hard to eliminate the undead and let the dead sleep. This caused countless undead to turn their backs on him and even stand beside Naruto to resist him, the king of the undead. If Soren had the same idea as Clemvox, there would be another outbreak of the undead after a few years. Chapter 1068. Soren finally persuaded the goddess of agriculture. With the support of the goddess of agriculture, the next thing would be much easier to do. However, unless the relationship between the gods was particularly close, even allies would have to pay a price for help. However, just as Soren was preparing what the goddess of agriculture needed him to pay, the goddess of agriculture lifted her long hair and smiled gently. No hurry, I'll let you know when I need it. In this regard, Soren couldn't help but frown and look at the other party seriously. The cost and the gain were equal. In this case, the goddess of agriculture was not in a hurry to make requests, so the requests in the future should not exceed the current cost. But now was not the time to worry about this. He finally smiled and said, then I'll wait for your good news. The goddess of agriculture nodded and said, well, I'll go to the glorious city tomorrow. There was not much time. After getting the promise of the goddess of agriculture, Soren immediately set off to return to the outer islands, but his destination was not the city of Mordor, but the city of Wealth on the south coast. It was not long before the end of the Avatar crisis. So much time had passed in the blink of an eye. After experiencing many shocks, the past glory of the city of Wealth was no longer there. However, the Church of the Goddess of Wealth was still the most powerful force here, and when the war subsided, commerce and trade would inevitably be revitalized. The Goddess of Wealth was very welcoming to Soren's arrival. In the past in-depth exchanges between the two sides, Soren had already given the Goddess of Wealth guidance, so that she had enough confidence to restore trade and economy after the war. Now what the Goddess of Wealth needed to do was to wait for the end of the Avatar crisis. At that time, many caravans of the Goddess of Wealth would set sail again. The gods had already felt it. Perhaps because of Soren's interference, the trajectory of fate had deviated to a certain extent. Although there were still many gods who fell, it was still a little less than in the past. And because there was no interference from adventurers, the number of gods who directly participated in the battle between the gods had decreased a lot, which also reduced the number of deaths. Perhaps it was because of Soren's example, the number of gods who were hiding in their fields had obviously increased. Even the Queen of Spiders, Loltha's aggro had decreased a lot compared to before. This was because many of the gods' kills had been stolen by Soren, and some of their aggro had shifted to Soren's side. The Queen of Spiders' biggest enemy was still the elven gods. "Welcome, sir. Lord Shadow." The goddess of wealth was wearing a long dress that shone with golden light. She looked very elegant. She personally appeared in front of the temple to welcome Soren's arrival. Soren smiled and followed her inside. The negotiation this time was very easy, especially after they had received so much support. The goddess of wealth had also given them some help. Soren stayed in the Temple of Wealth for a day, and then went to the place where he first rose, which was Port Tylon, controlled by the sea goddess. Port Tylon. Because it was an island, the impact wasn't that great. The high priestess of the sea temple still maintained the order of the past, and began to pray every morning. But today seemed to be a little different. When her prayer sounded, the power of the statue of the goddess of ocean emitted a golden light. She thought that her prayer had been answered by the goddess, but then she saw a beautiful woman with a trident coming down from the statue. The sea goddess's target wasn't her, but walked directly to the front of the temple, as if she was welcoming someone's arrival. Soren's figure appeared. He smiled and nodded at the sea goddess in front of him, and the sea goddess also bowed slightly. Both sides didn't care about the others around them, and the high priestess of the sea temple looked at Soren in a daze. After noticing the faintly discernible sight, she immediately lowered her head humbly. Soren was now a great existence that she needed to look up to. As a god who had cooperated with Soren in the beginning, the sea goddess was easily persuaded by Soren. She was willing to help Soren and assist him in obtaining the clergy of death. This was good news, because after Soren's lobbying he had gained a lot of support. Now, Soren only had one goal left: Moonlight Woodland. This beautiful forest was located near the ruins of the Silver Moon City. It had a special lock and was also the core area of the intersection of the Silver Moon City. In order to guard against the attack of the Lady of the Night, there were many moonwalkers stationed here. The magic circle here could absorb the tidal power of the moon, and even the gods were not sure if they could break it. When Soren arrived, it was still calm. Because the goddess of magic was not dead, the power of the Lady of the Silver Moon had not recovered much, so she was still only at the level of a mid-level divine power. If the goddess of magic died and the power of the Lady of the Silver Moon returned, then this goddess would at least be at the level of a great divine power. It could be said that Soren's interference in history had the greatest impact on her. Although the Lady of the Silver Moon herself didn't know this, and she didn't even want the goddess of magic to die. The goddesses of magic of the past were like close allies and daughters of the Lady of the Silver Moon. Soren couldn't find the goddess of magic, but he thought that the Moonlight Woodland was the most likely place to hide her. This place was protected by a powerful lock. There were moonwalkers stationed here, and in addition there were also powerful Silver Star emissaries, spellcasters who could mobilize the power of the moon. Soren's arrival was not hidden. As the light of divinity fell, Soren's clone directly appeared outside the Moonlight Woodland. Soon a group of tall moonwalkers appeared. Their leader was a grassland elf. The elf frowned as she looked at Soren and bowed slightly. She then said, "Lord Shadow, welcome." In the depths of the Moonlight Woodland, a light rose. The Lady of the Silver Moon already knew of Soren's arrival and sent an oracle to welcome him. Soren nodded slightly and followed the moonwalkers into the woodland. This was a private kingdom, and almost all of them were believers of the Lady of the Silver Moon. However, Soren also saw some secret knights, which made him even more certain that the goddess of magic was hiding here. The two goddesses had joined forces and were secretly plotting something. Lord Shadow. The Lady of the Silver Moon's figure appeared on the altar in front of him. Soren didn't have many interactions with her, so they weren't close, but they weren't strangers either. Soren bowed slightly to show his respect. Lady of the Silver Moon. Su Luan stared at Soren in front of her. She frowned slightly and said with a smile, "Welcome. But I'm curious as to why you chose to visit at this time." Soren met her gaze and calmly said, "I'm here to visit the Lady of the Silver Moon. And Lady Mistra." Mistra was the goddess of magic. The Lady of the Silver Moon hesitated for a moment in response to Soren's straightforwardness. She then asked, "How did you know she was here?" "I guessed." Soren smiled. This was the most likely place for the goddess of magic to be. It was also the only place where she could hide from the gods. Even after so long, they still couldn't find any trace of her. "Long time no see.
A tall, slender, and beautiful young human woman with translucent skin and flowing black hair appeared in the form of a long flowing black hair. She wore a simple but elegant dark silk robe and a net belt embedded with gems. This item represented the magic network that Mystra was in charge of. This was the goddess of magic's usual incarnation. Soren had the divine title of tracking, so it wasn't surprising that he could find the goddess of magic. Thus Mystra simply showed up. Soren met Mystra's gaze and smiled. Long time no see, Lady Mystra. This was Soren's final goal. Because of her relationship with Klemvox in the past, she was a great help to Klemvox in his quest to regain his divine title of death. Since the Lady of the Night was also involved in this battle, the two goddesses would secretly help Klemvox regain his divine title. They were Soren's last obstacle. What Soren needed to do was to find a way to persuade them and gain the support of the goddess of magic and the Lady of the Silver Moon to weaken them and strengthen himself. To put it bluntly, that was, Soren had to knock on Klemvox's wall. Only in this way could he gain the greatest advantage. P.S. This book is almost finished. Don't worry. There's an epilogue after this. The epilogue is about the kingdom of God and spans 10 years. Chapter 1069. There was no doubt about it. Mystra was in a difficult position right now. It was obvious from her conflicted expression that she was in a dilemma. The Lady of Silver Moon had no intention of helping either. After all, she had to make her own choice. She had also guessed that the goddess of magic was able to escape her previous ambush thanks to Soren's help. However, she didn't know what kind of relationship Soren had with Mystra. The gods of this world were relatively open-minded. In some ways they were similar to the unrestrained Olympian gods. However, they had been silent for far too long. No one knew what would happen in the long history of this world. Even the gods could be wiped out. The goddess of magic stared at Soren, her eyes flickering. She was Mystra. She was also Midnight, a former human mage. Klemvox was her lover before she became a god. Although their relationship gradually faded, there was still some history between them. On the other hand, Soren was her close ally. To some extent, he could even be considered her current lover, or so she thought. If she had to choose between the two, it would undoubtedly be difficult. One was her past lover and the other was her current lover. Although the former was far away, they still had a past. The latter, on the other hand, had saved her life once and helped Mystra survive a life-threatening crisis. How should she choose? Soren seemed to sense the goddess of magic's dilemma. He looked a little disappointed. I don't want to make things difficult for you. However, this is a battle of fate. Whether it's me, Klemvox, or Naruto, this battle is unavoidable. It's inevitable that the three gods of death will reunite. The future world also needs this power. The Bator Inferno is restless. At this point, Soren glanced at the two goddesses' expressions. As expected, their expressions changed slightly. He then continued, perhaps you don't know, but Sirik has already broken free from his seal. He's also secretly watching everything. The undead hated Klemvox, which made Naruto even more powerful. Whether it's Naruto or Sirik, neither of them can become the winner. I'm not asking you to help me fight against Klemvox. I just hope that if the final battle is between me and Klemvox, I won't be your enemy. It seemed that it would be difficult to win over the goddess of magic as an ally, which disappointed Soren greatly. Even though he had saved the goddess and helped her through a crisis, she still couldn't stand by his side. It could be seen from the very beginning. After the goddess of magic was injured, she never appeared in front of Soren. Instead, she hid in the Silver Moon Lady's place. Soren, who was extremely disappointed, had already excluded the goddess of magic from his circle. Someone who couldn't stand behind him at such a critical moment wasn't worth his effort. However, he still had to fight for it, so he said, I only hope a little. You can stay out of the battle between me and Klemvox. If the final victor is me and him, then I hope you can stay neutral. It seemed that he couldn't win over the goddess of magic. For this reason, Soren could only lower his request and ask her to stay out of the battle between him and Klemvox. This was already a very low request. After all, Soren had saved her once. Mystra's eyes wavered a little, but she was also relieved. She even felt a little sorry for Soren. In fact, Klemvox had met her a long time ago and asked for her help against his enemy. However, at that time, the goddess of magic hadn't recovered from her injuries, so she didn't agree. In contrast, Soren's request was much lower. He didn't force her to help, but only hoped that she would stay neutral and not be his enemy.
At this point, the goddess of magic had no choice. The goddess of magic had no other choice. She could either agree to Soren's request or become his enemy in the future. This wasn't something that anyone wanted. Thus, the goddess of magic quickly replied, "I can promise you. I'll stay neutral between you and Clemvox." Soren nodded. Then, he bowed slightly to the Lady of Silvermoon and left the forest. To be honest, he was still very disappointed. However, some things couldn't be forced. It could only be said that the goddess of magic couldn't stand on his side this time. In the following battle between her and Lady of the Night, Soren wouldn't help her either. According to the progress of history, the goddess of magic would be at a disadvantage in the next battle. In the past, even with the help of adventurers, the goddess of magic couldn't defeat Lady of the Night. This time, Soren wouldn't help her. Whether she could survive or not would depend on her luck. Because the goddess of magic's choice had exhausted the last bit of affection between Soren and her. Soren left the Moonlight Forest, but this time he didn't leave with a smile. Only his eyes were a little cold. Just after Soren left, the Lady of Silvermoon shook her head and sighed. "You still can't let go of your past with Clemvox? In fact, you should choose to work with Soren. He's a powerful and scheming god. Moreover, he holds the divine title of Shadow, and doesn't have a good relationship with Lady of the Night. If you agree with him, it's very likely that we'll be able to pull him to our side." Hearing the Lady of Silvermoon's words, Mistra's eyes flickered. Although every Mistra would inherit the memories of her previous life, the consciousness that dominated was still Midnight. In other words, Midnight only had the memories of the past goddess of magic, but her thoughts were still her own. This caused her to unconsciously lean towards Clemvox. Today's actions had undoubtedly pushed Solen's relationship with him further away. For a moment, even the goddess of magic felt a little lost. After all, Soren had saved her once and the two of them were quite close. This choice undoubtedly hurt his feelings. The goddess of magic suddenly felt a little regretful. But at this point there was no other choice. She could only look in the direction Soren left and let out a deep sigh. Outside the Moonlight Forest, just as Soren's clone was about to return to the south coast, he suddenly felt the aura of battle. Then his figure appeared near a hill. There were many corpses here. He bent down and picked up an emblem from one of the corpses. The emblem was 5 hands holding a scimitar in a circle. A follower of the god of war, Clemvox? Soren frowned and muttered, "Looks like the god of war is finally going to make a move against the god of war." There wasn't only one god of war. Many gods of war had been born from this divine title, but the most powerful one was undoubtedly the god of war, Tempest. He was the victor in history. At least 10 gods of war had been born in the long history. The god of war had been trying to eliminate them since the time of Mother Earth. At present, the only surviving god of war in the human god system was the god of war that Soren had just mentioned. One of the two gods was a lesser god, and the other was a greater god. It looks like the god of war is going to take back all the divine titles of war. It was a battle without any suspense. Soren took a look and left. The gods were all planning something. There were too many things happening in the Avatar crisis, and he didn't have the energy to participate in many of them. It was almost time. It was getting closer and closer to the promotion ceremony of Nero. This battle would be a big mess. As for who would be the winner in the end, no one knew. Soren also had to make more preparations. Clemvox had obviously started to act. The goddess of magic didn't agree to stand behind him. There was no doubt that Clemvox had secretly looked for her. Since he had already looked for the goddess of magic, Clemvox would definitely try to rope in other gods. Soren had to be more prepared. The most important thing now was the god of light's attitude. As long as the god of light supported him, then the goddess of magic's attitude wasn't too important. After all, there was still the Lady of Night watching in the dark. Chapter 1070. Long Sleep, Realm. This kind of power was mostly given by the gods of order. Kalemver, Jurgil, Osiris, the god of death of the Muhammad pantheon, and Ulugilan, the god of death of the Halfling pantheon, all had the power to give the realm of eternal rest. Soren slowly let go of the secret scroll in his hand and then murmured, "Long Sleep, Realm." If he wanted to compete for the clergy of death, then the Long Sleep Realm was something that must be maintained. Without the Long Sleep Realm, it meant that the dead would be disturbed, and a large number of the dead would not be able to rest in peace. Things were not too bad. Shortly after Soren returned to the city of Moder, he received a message from the goddess of agriculture. The god of light seemed to support him a little. It seemed that the god of light was disappointed with Clemvox this time. Although he thought that Naruto should pay the greatest price for all this, Clemvox also had an unshirkable responsibility. In the long history, there had never been such a big undead riot among the previous gods of death. Since the ancient god of death, Jurgel, many undead had been suppressed in the lower planes. Although this time it was because of the Avatar crisis, Clemvox undoubtedly failed in his duty. Perhaps it was because of this that Soren came into contact with Naruto. This ancient one seemed to have the idea of selecting a new successor. The god of light has made some progress. Although he did not win over the goddess of magic, he also kept her neutral. Jurgel does not seem to support Clemvox very much. No wonder he met me, it should be because of the power of slaughter. Naruto, Clemvox, Sirik. There are many undead kings behind Naruto, and his power is still the strongest at present. And this time the undead disaster was launched by him. Naruto has the most powerful power of death. Clemvox's strength has been greatly reduced, but his secret allies should still have some. Sirik's power is the weakest, and his relationship with the gods is also the worst. Therefore, in the following battle he should be hiding in the dark. He pondered for a long time. Soren finally opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "Death is still Clemvox's domain." In other words, in Clemvox's eyes, Naruto is his greatest enemy. As long as he defeats Naruto, he will be able to recover his strength. At that time, no one will be able to stop him from taking back the Death Priesthood. Naruto understands this very well. As long as he defeats Clemvox, he will be the undisputed god of death. In that case, my target should be Sirik. Only by killing Sirik first and letting Clemvox and Naruto exhaust a bit of their strength will I have more confidence in killing them. On the surface, the main forces of this battle were still Naruto and Clemvox. Soren was just a schemer, so it was best for him to kill the other schemer first. The power of death was getting stronger and stronger. Now, the population of the material plane was only about 40% of what it used to be. The undead kings obtained a large number of souls from the material plane. This was their reward, and it was also something that Naruto acquiesced to. Naruto's promotion ceremony should be launched within this month, and what Soren needed to do now was to find traces of Sirik. Come. Soren's figure appeared in the great temple, and he ordered the arcane assassin who served him, send the rogues in the central area to find out any news about Sirik. Also, send someone to check on the pygmy god system. Sirik seemed to have attacked the pygmy god system. He was a cunning god and he was always thinking of ways to strengthen himself. Time passed little by little. With the gathering of the power of death, Clemvox's church suddenly became active. The members of Clemvox's church were usually silent, to the point of being gloomy. Many of the members joined the ranks of the undead king after losing their loved ones to the invasion of the undead creatures, or even after experiencing death themselves, and being brought back to the mortal world. There was no doubt that Clemvox's church grew stronger in the current environment. After Clemvox's return, the church quickly recruited a group of people who were affected by the undead disaster. Naruto won the support of the dead and Clemvox won the support of the living. In this disaster, too many people were killed by the undead, and their surviving relatives joined Clemvox's church. The counterattack against the undead began after the dragon, which church was severely injured by the giant dragon. Perhaps the gods could no longer tolerate Naruto's actions, or perhaps Clemvox persuaded the other gods. Currently, at least 3 gods began to launch a counterattack against the undead. The glorious city finally made a move. The paladins gathered and began to attack the undead's base camp. Under the influence of this, the other gods' churches also began to take action. As a god from another world, Naruto's biggest weakness was finally exposed. That was, he did not have many allies among the gods. Naruto was an absolute supporter of those who did evil for their own pleasure. In Naruto's cold world, everything was the same. To him, all living creatures were a great insult to him, the god of death. On the contrary, all dying creatures shone with green and black sparks of joy, and he liked these sparks. Some people did not pray to Naruto sincerely, hoping to obtain Naruto's power. Most of them were given death as a reward by Naruto. The god's goal was Naruto's temple. This was the origin of all death and also the source of the outbreak of the undead disaster. However, Naruto's temples were usually hidden. Even in places full of evil, they were usually built underground and were usually part of the underground tomb. Most of the temples contained undead creatures and other creatures that spread death or created death, such as banshees and devils. Therefore, the gods soon realized that something was wrong. This was because their church had encountered another terrifying enemy, and that was devils. Yes, the devils seemed to have joined Naruto's camp. In the counterattacks, people suddenly found traces of many devils near Naruto's temples. This made people feel uneasy. Clemvox's church pushed forward in the first wave of attacks, but when the church members found more and more Naruto's underground temples, they encountered very fierce resistance. Large numbers of undead creatures, numerous necromancers, and higher devils gradually appeared. Lesser devils, imps, horned devils. At first only a few low-ranked devils appeared, but as the battle escalated, the shadows of Babas, chain devils, and zoo devils, hellcats, lustful devils, overlords, ice devils, and horned devils gradually appeared. Finally, when the abyss devils appeared in Naruto's camp, the gods finally realized the severity of the situation. Clemvox's church was once again damaged. The evil devils were involved in this battle. After the abyss had continuously probed the material plane many times, the cunning devils finally entered the material plane for the first time. And this time they chose to support the evil Naruto. At this moment, many gods even suspected that the outbreak of the undead disaster was the scheme of the incomparably evil existence that lived in the depths of the Bator Inferno. Chapter 1071. Everything was for the sake of souls. In fact, whether it was the high and mighty gods, the demons of the bottomless abyss, or the Bator Inferno, the most important wealth was souls. For a long time, whether it was the Bator Inferno or the bottomless abyss, the number of souls that could be obtained from the river Styx was extremely limited. Most of the high-quality souls were divided among the gods. After all, the faithless were only a small part of them. The remaining souls were all ugly and not very useful. That was why there were special existences like soul stealers in the lower planes. Generations of death gods were strictly guarded against the Bator Inferno and the bottomless abyss because the responsibility of the death gods was to maintain the flow of the river Styx and maintain the home of souls after death. Therefore, the most common opponent of the death god servants were the soul stealers from the lower planes. And now it seemed that Naruto had colluded with the demons. Most of the underworld had fallen into Naruto's control. Some undead lords had also reached into the underworld. After the underworld lost control of Clemvox, there was no doubt that the demons had also taken a share of the loot. Naruto had betrayed the river Styx's interests. In order to make the demons take action, they had to give them benefits that they could see, and it would be best if they could get it right away. Now that the demons' army was escorting Naruto, the gods could be sure that a part of the river Styx had been stolen by the demons. This discovery made the gods a little angry and uneasy, because all gods followed a basic principle, and that was, unless the souls of the believers were particularly outstanding, such as those that were close to the level of the holy spirits, they would be sent to the gods' kingdoms by the death god servants after passing through the river Styx. But now, who would still believe in Naruto's death god servants? Who wouldn't be worried that their believers' souls would be stolen and desecrated by the demons? Far away in the east, just as the southern part of the continent began to counterattack against the undead, many monasteries in the eastern countries also joined forces to eliminate the mummies and undead. Some of the members of the Dragon Witch cult had fled to the Desert of Death, but they did not give up because Nero was still very powerful. They had joined the god of death, Nero, and captured many flying dragon subspecies to create a new batch of low-level dragon liches. These were puppets controlled by the Dragon Witch sect. Although they were slightly weaker, they obeyed orders. At this moment, near a barren mountain range, one of the allied forces from the Eastern Kingdom was approaching this mountain range. The undead in the depths of the desert were all awakened by Naruto's evil power. For a long time, Naruto's church had been spreading in the desert. Among the allied forces from the eastern countries, the figure of the young girl Cicada was a little eye-catching. On one hand, she was too young. Standing among a group of middle-aged legendary monks, she was very eye-catching. On the other hand, it was because she belonged to a new force. This fist master's reputation had soared in the battle against the ancient evil. Now she was already the leader of the Night Shadow monk group. The members of the monk group were blessed by the Shadow Lord. They could master and strengthen the special skills of Shadow Nanda and Lunar Shadow. This power allowed them to completely hide themselves and jump through the shadow space to a certain extent, making the monks' movements more erratic. This was the group of monks blessed by Soren. Compared to the past, Cicada had quickly matured after many battles, especially after becoming the leader of the monk group. She also had a trace of a superior aura. The situation in the Eastern Kingdom had improved a lot. After the elimination of the ancient evil, the remaining enemies were much easier to deal with. The Luo demons had been defeated, and some of the Yin spirits had been resealed. At present the only troublesome thing was the mummy army. The god of death, Nero, had awakened many ancient mummies. Some ancient pyramids even had mummies sealed in them that were older than the arcane kingdom. This battle was very crucial, because below this place was Naruto's great temple, a base camp for awakening and reviving the undead. There were standards for the size of the temples that served the gods. The lowest level was the altar, then the altar, the temple, the great temple, and then the great temple. As for the Pantheon temple, it had not appeared in the material plane yet. The altar was very simple. It could be activated after a blood sacrifice. The altar was a little more troublesome. At the very least, it needed to be continuously sacrificed and prayed for a period of time. Then there was the temple, which was the place where the gods responded and prayed and sacrificed for many years. Generally, the temples of the gods would only appear in towns and cities, and it would take several years to build, and it would often last for decades before the glory of divinity shrouded it. The temple was the official headquarters of the church. A temple was equivalent to half a wizard tower, and most of the temples took decades or centuries to build, so these temples often did not change their positions easily. Finally, there was the great temple. Such a place must be covered by a trace of the god's mind. Just like Soren's great temple, he could easily perceive what was happening inside. The great temple itself was equivalent to the core camp, and the statues inside were all possessed by the god's body. At present, even Soren only had one great temple, and it was only in the center of Motor City. Other than that, the highest level in other places was the temple level. The destruction of any great temple by the enemy was a serious blow to the gods, and even directly weakened the power of the gods and the church to some extent. Therefore, the defense here was also very strong. Naruto's collusion with the devils had caused too much hostility. Not only did the eastern countries launch a counterattack, but other places were also looking for and destroying Naruto's temples. At this time, at the top of the mountain in front, hundreds of Dracolic were hovering in the sky. This place was guarded by the remaining members of the Dracolic religion. In addition to the believers of Naruto's church, there were also some devils. The White Cloud sect and the Shadow sect can be responsible for the surprise attack. A fist master with white eyebrows sat on a chair and said to the other monasteries and forces present, "But those Dracolic are very difficult to deal with. They fly in the air and it's difficult for monks to deal with them." Monks could fly in the air for a short period of time, but they had to learn the ethereal form, which most monks could not do. The others frowned when they heard this. All the forces gathered here were from the eastern countries, and the monasteries were the mainstream. Monks were very strong on the ground, but it was hard to say if they were in the sky. There was a short pause. Then the fist master looked at the Empress of the East on the right and said slowly, "I think only the Empress has a way to deal with these Dracolic." Many monasteries' eyes lit up when they heard this. The Empress of the East fell into silence. After a while she said, "Yes. I will summon ancient allies to deal with them." You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.